All right, we're going to be playing a excerpt of an interview that took place on October 18th of last year between uh, growing libertarian channel Reed Coverdale, the Naturalist Capitalist show, where he interviewed the co-producer of Loose Change, Jason Bermas, regarding Shanksville and what happened at Shanksville and what happened at the Pentagon on September 11, 2001. So I'm going to be playing the video. The video I cut out for is for 41 minutes. The interview was a little bit longer than that, but this is long enough. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch together what is being said in this video between Reed and Jason Bermas. So let me do this and let's play.
Well, actually, that was a follow-up to Clinton's penis and Lewinsky, right? Those are the big stories of the 24-hour news networks that birthed us, MSNBC and Fox News and all these things. CNN had been around since, the Gulf War. But when 9/11 happened, they turned every network into 24-hour news. There was no television at all for a week, at least. And some went longer than a week, right? So immediately I became a news junkie, right? That was all I was watching, the heightened fear, the new awareness that something was wrong, constantly watching these things. So, it wasn't like I was into Fox flavor by any means, but just it was on. And they talked about a book called Le Pentagate. And it was by a guy named, quote unquote, Thierry Meyssan, right? And it had basically, they were saying that this guy made the case that no plane had hit the Pentagon, right? And my immediate reaction was, fuck that guy and fuck the French, right? Remember, there was a point where we hated the French so much. Yeah. Well, we hated the French so much during the War on Terror that we had freedom fries, right? Like that's how absurd things were in this time period. So that was my immediate reaction. I didn't think much about it after that. I thought conspiracy theory, there's no chance, whatever. And then the next thing that kind of hit me, where I gave it more of a consideration, was there was a gentleman on MSNBC.
Right, he doesn't explain about Thierry Meyssan. I will. Thierry Meyssan is a fringe conspiracy theorist based out of France. We've written, I think, 2 or 3 books regarding 9/11. One was Le Pentagate. Basically, he wasn't even there on September 11, 2001. He basically took photographs of the Pentagon, which was taken from, I believe, people who were passing by the Pentagon who actually took video. There's actually video of the aftermath. And some people were taking pictures and whatnot. Some of this went to the FBI and some of it actually was posted online. But yet they didn't show what Thierry Meyssan did was he took select pictures. So in other words, there's one infamous picture where the Arlington County Fire Department is this green truck that's shooting foam across into the generator area and the first floor, covering the whole first floor with this white foam. And all you could see was damage on the second floor. And all you saw was the damage made by the roof of the plane. So it showed this small little damage to where the window was, right above, that's the second floor. And Thierry Meyssan said that was the hole. That's the impact hole. And Jason Bermas fell for it at the time. And he's never changed his mind after that. In fact, so many people fell for it that people like Barbara Honegger, Rebecca Roth, Christopher Bolin, Jim Fetzer, Jim Mars, dozens of others, Craig McKee and, Citizens Investigation Team, they all fell for this. In fact, no, I'm sorry. Citizens Investigation Team and Craig McKee actually think the plane actually flew over the Pentagon. Wow. Okay. So you have piles for 9/11 truth. You have a lot of people that fell for this. And that's exactly why I think that Thierry Meyssan, did that on purpose. In fact, there was a conversation I had with Scott Orden where he basically said that Thierry Meyssan had a conversation with Greg Palast. And Greg Palast, according to him, he said that Thierry Meyssan did that on purpose, intentionally, to show how stupid American people are. And guess what? Most of the 9/11 truth movement are divided on this fact. And what does that say about half of the truth movement? If that's the case, let's just say that that's the case. Half of the truth movement actually fell for this. What does that say about them? Well, they're not very good researchers, because if you're going to go just by what someone who wasn't even there promotes on his own book, and you're not going to research what he authors, well, what does that say about you? Why would you not want to listen to the people who were actually there, right? If you're, I did this yesterday with Barbara Honegger in the video, where I said, why would you listen to Barbara Honegger? She wasn't even there. Why don't you listen to the people that were there that actually saw the plane crash into the Pentagon?
BC, this was pre-Iraq war, talking about how the military's response on 9/11, it was a stand down, basically. Where were the fighter jets? And that,
well, I used to think that way, that it was a stand down order. Actually, no. In fact, Dick Cheney actually overstepped his command. Now, I mentioned this yesterday, but I'll go a little bit further with you today. While Bush was in Air Force One in the skies, he basically couldn't get a consistent connection with Dick Cheney. Now, Donald Rumsfeld is outside the Pentagon. He's the Secretary of Defense. Now, in terms of a shoot down order, it goes from the President to the Secretary of Defense to NORAD, right? The continuity of government is broken. So with that, Dick Cheney is not part of the military chain of command. He has no authorization on his own to give a shoot down order. Now, according to White House Chief of Staff Thomas Baker, and according to Norman Mineta, they basically said they heard Dick Cheney give authorization for a shoot down at 9:36 or 9:30 or 9:40 or something like that. Now, there's no record of Cheney and Bush ever talking at this point in time where Bush gave a shoot down order. In fact, it's only because of Andrew Card, who was his chief of staff on board Air Force One, where he wrote in his notes that he heard Bush give the authorization for the shoot down order at 10:30 or 10:36, something like that. And that was well after all the planes had crashed. So, and that's the first recorded instance of Bush telling Cheney that he approves for a shoot down order. Now, there's a number of different exercises happening all throughout the United States. Amalgam Virgo 1, Amalgam Virgo 2. And a lot of these exercises took a lot of these planes who weren't even weaponized. That means they weren't ready weapons on these planes, right? So a lot of these planes basically were in the Northeast, Southwest, even toward the border of Canada. And so Andrews Air Force Base, Otis Air Force Base were basically left with a minimal amount of reinforcements. And by the time the FAA got in touch with Cheyenne Mountain, which is the headquarters of NORAD, speaking with Kevin Nespaney, the colonel, he had to get authorization from his superiors, which are Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Eberhardt, Larry Arnold, and Craig McKinley. I think McKinley actually is who he's talking to. And so there's a chain of command regarding a shoot down order. So these planes, especially with National Air Force, which I mentioned yesterday in Barbara Honegger's video, you had one of the pilots, Heather Penny, basically were going to try and fly into Flight 93 and then eject out of the seat because they didn't have weapons on the planes. They basically just took off. So it's like what shoot down order, because there was no planes in the air with weapons. So there wouldn't be a stand down order. In fact, these planes weren't even ready for shoot down order authority. So what kind of shoot down, what kind of stand down is there going to be?
That sounded pretty reasonable, actually. That was something that in my head, I was like, you know what? That's a reasonable question. We should probably have that question, especially now that we know that this isn't just Afghanistan and, it wasn't just we rolled over them. They won Iraq, right? And there was talk of Iran and much more. So that caught my eye. It wasn't until I was in my old high school, okay? So it's probably about like a little less than a year after the attacks. I was in my old high school to go play a men's night basketball game. A couple of my friends had graduated. They'd become teachers. Okay, so they were there playing. And while I was there, I went to go take a piss in my old, my old locker room. And in the urinal, and this was a middle/high school. I graduated with 54 kids, right? Upstate New York, very small. And in the urinal, it said Operation Enduring Freedom, and it was a picture of bin Laden on the urinal cake. And you could actually look these things up. And I'm sitting there pissing on it. And I'm thinking, man, this is kind of nuts. They got kids pissing on this guy's face. Like, it just something clicked in my brain. You know, that was a big clicking moment. Because speaking of, you know, the time when I was a kid, you know, I never pissed on Gorbachev, right? That wasn't a thing. And he was the big enemy and Russia was the big enemy. And I saw the parallels and I'm like, that's a pretty vulgar act. And that's a pretty subliminal act. I've got to make sure that they're telling us the truth about this because, you know, through all this, I hadn't mentioned the Kennedy assassination, but that was another thing. You know, in the late 90s, I could get Kennedy documents now. It's like, wow, you know, I could watch all these documentaries that were kind of out there. So I came across a site called 911standdown.net and www.911timeline.net first. It's by the same guy. The stand down one, you know, don't get me wrong, it was good afterwards, but 911timeline.net is just 12 a.m. to 12 a.m. of that day. That was the first thing in my brain. I said, all right, let's take a 24-hour look at what happened that day. And are there a lot of problems? And basically, I had this synopsis on how much we spent on defense. It also mentioned how empty the planes were for that morning, which
is not weird at all, Jason, because that's why they chose Tuesday. It's the lightest load of all the days of the week regarding airline traffic, airline loads, which are people who board the plane. And, you know, for months, they were scouting our security apparatuses at these airlines. And I do notice that Jason Bermas tends, and I didn't put it in the video, but Jason Bermas talked about the actor James Woods seeing Muhammad Atta in Atlanta or something like that, or on a plane to that effect, months prior to 9/11. So we do have reports coming from the memorandum for the record, which I basically upload on my WordPress, which you can read at your leisure, where they interviewed security personnel of Huntley, of Oregon Bright, where they said that they noticed seeing the photographs of the hijackers, Muhammad Atta, Marwan al-Shehi, and a couple of others who basically said that, yeah, we saw these people. In fact, I think there's one instance where Muhammad Atta was dressed as a pilot in Atlanta. I want to say it's Atlanta. I could be wrong about the city. Months prior to 9/11, something to that effect. And that's actually reported on the news or something like that. I'll try to find that. But yeah, it's not too eerie to think, oh, these planes were light. In fact, they didn't want a lot of people on the planes because they would fight back. And there's only like 4 or 5 of these guys on the planes, and one speculation on my part regarding 93. I only think there was 3 hijackers in that plane, and that's the reason why they fought back. But that's for another time. I mentioned why I think that way anyway. But yeah,
kind of weird. And a couple other points, but then it went 12 to 12, and there were just so many anomalies, man. That's
if you don't study these anomalies correctly, you're not going to understand why why there were very few people on these planes to begin with on 9/11. There was. I mean, it was like I said, it was light loads. And there's a reason why they chose September, and that's why they chose Tuesday, because less people tend to fly in the fall months on a Tuesday. And it's not hard to understand that. You have to do, slight research on the subject.
When I went to standdown.net, that's when I started downloading video. That's when I found stuff on, questioning whether the Pentagon had been hit by a plane or a missile and all these other types.
Why would you think that way, right? Because to you, if one thing is out of order, that means everything is out of order, right? Or if one thing is wrong about the 9/11 Commission report, then everything is wrong. No, that's not the way to go about it. And I think Reed Coverdale actually covers this, and he says, well, there are truth mixed with lies. And that's exactly right, because I hate to use this term, but the shadow government wants, right? They want you to not make a decision, right? With decision, you have knowledge. So this is the reason why I tend to always quote my favorite quote, which is belief versus knowledge, which is a letter written by a former JFK researcher and forensic psychologist, E. Martin Schatz, to another JFK researcher, Vincent Saladino, where he basically says that the problem with the American premise, and this is not a quote, but this is generally what the prose is saying. The problem with the American public is that they're allowed to believe anything, but to know nothing, because with knowledge, you can act on it, right? So a decision is made, that's knowledge. Indecision is belief. And with belief, when it comes to truth, belief has no validity, right? You either have knowledge or you don't. Either it's a yes or a no, okay? Either one is a decision. Either it's true or it's false. But if you're led to believe anything, you can't act on it. So you're led in a state of paralysis. And that's exactly where the shadow government wants you to be, or the intelligence services, or whatever, right? Illuminati world, new world order, right? Whatever floats your boat. Anyway, regarding that, that's exactly where they want you to be. Indecisive, confused, and spreading false propaganda, right? Because now it's just a war for your mind. And that's exactly what certain entities of the American military, in which I did an interview with Liberty Weekly, one of my favorites, actually. And we talked about psychological operations. And that's exactly what the 9/11 Truth Movement suffers from. Because you had a number of people, especially someone who worked under the Reagan administration and Barbara Honecker, propagate these theories. And basically she admits they're nothing more than her studied opinion. And yet people still believe her because, hey, at least we're against the government narrative. Well, no, you're actually for the government narrative, because what you are doing is propagating false beliefs. And it becomes a repetition. The next generation proposes them, the next generation proposes them, or it evolves into a more ridiculous proposition.
To things. For instance, even the first edition of Loose Change that I was not a part of, the pod on the bottom of the plane that hits the second tower, okay, supposedly Flight 175. That was something that, he had 4 videos on, and I had actually found a 5th that didn't make the film of, this anomaly that appears to be something that's shot out of the underside of.
No, nothing was shot out on the other side of Flight 175. In fact, a survivor of flight of the South Tower, I always forget his name. It's an Indian guy, and he basically said that he saw Flight 175 crash right into his office. He survived because the plane actually went 1 floor above where he was at, and there was no missile, because if there was a missile underneath the plane, he would have been dead, right? He would have been blown out of the office. And so that's another problem that you have, Jason Bermas, is because you actually don't really critique your own position. This is what an investigator actually does. An honest investigator actually plays devil's advocate, whether I'm right or wrong. Stanley Pramath actually went and looked on my phone. Stanley Pramath actually was a survivor of the South Tower, and he's actually he actually was working for Fuji Bank, and he was actually at I want to say he's one of 18 people that survived. And what floor was he on? 81st floor, and the plane, he saw the plane coming right at him. And Brian Clark actually was another survivor, and they're the only people who survived the above ground. I think him and 16 others. So Brian Clark went and heard a voice, and it was Stanley Pramath, and they both, escaped out of the tower. And so they're public. They're public. If there was a pod or a missile underneath the plane, it shot into the South Tower, Stanley Pramath would be dead, so would be Brian Clark and 16 others that survived above the impact. So this is ridiculous.
The plane, all these things. So really, what blew it over the top for me is the backstory was there, but then there was a lot of other physical evidence.
Why would you need to shoot a missile into the World Trade Center? You have a plane fully loaded. That's a plane that was fully loaded from East Coast to West Coast because it was going to land at LAX airport, which is Los Angeles International. 33,000 pounds of fuel. I mean, right there, guys, that's a bomb. And that explosion, and by the way, that light you see that Jason Bermas and Barbara Honegger harp on is kinetic energy. It's actually one object, a solid object with a lot of speed and heat, puncturing an object, right? And what's puncturing is the facade of the World Trade Center, which is the aluminum cladding, which is protecting the steel girders. And that plane exploded on impact. And you saw it in the North Tower, you saw it in the South Tower. And all that, the plane's not going through the building. Certain truthers love to say, oh, we saw the nose cone come out the other side. That's ridiculous. What happened was the plane exploded on impact. That force and the energy behind it was so enormous that it blew out to the other side. Considering that a lot of these offices are basically made out of cheap plastic and paper, and aluminum cladding was the only thing that was hard to puncture. And it went right through, the explosion went right through. You saw it. I mean, you saw the engine fly right out to Church Street. So there you have it.
Obviously, Building 7 would be there. The no footage at the Pentagon, when you started to look at what was actually going on.
Well, there was footage, just that, you know, the plane's going for over 500 miles an hour. It's not going to capture the plane in one single photograph. Not to mention, you know, again, with the videos, I don't need video to know what happened at the Pentagon, because I'll just listen to the people who were actually there and saw the plane actually hit the Pentagon for their own eyes. But what the Truth Movement and Jason Bermas loves to do, especially CIT, they actually did a hit piece on all the people who actually, and then took them out of context. CIT did this. And they basically said, well, you know, that's not what they said. Meanwhile, that's exactly what they said. And I gave the eyewitness listing on the Barbara Honegger video, which is in the description. So Jason Bermas actually loves to refer to April Gallup, just like Barbara Honegger does. And April Gallup was inside the building. I'll interview the people outside the building, but you won't hear Jason Bermas ever talk about any of the people, 88 of them, who basically saw an American Airlines plane. All right, that's definitive, that's descriptive. And over 100 people who actually saw a plane crash.
Going down at Shanksville, Pennsylvania, that you had this 8-mile debris field and they hadn't recovered any bodies, et cetera, et cetera.
Like, yeah, there's another thing we're going to get into about Shanksville and whole bodies. You know, this is the big reason why he doesn't believe a Flight 93 crashed in Shanksville, because there's no whole bodies. And, you know, this is really easy to explain why. The plane is going 563 miles an hour, fully loaded with, I think it was 28,000 pounds of fuel. And it crashed on a 90-degree angle into the ground. So that means that the end of the plane became the beginning of the plane in less than half a second. Now, I ask you, good people, do you think a human body, which is made out of liquid, 90% of it is made out of liquid, is going to survive under those conditions? I'm asking you. This is not like a plane where it's trying to land, because this is another fault of Jason Bermas, where he actually compares plane crashes to intentional plane crashes, right? An intentional plane crash is rare. So Jason Bermas does this. Well, look at all the other times we saw plane crashes and we saw large pieces of the plane. That would be right, because the pilot is actually in charge of the plane and he dumped the fuel and he's trying to land on its belly as slow as possible. That wasn't the case on 9/11. They were trying to impact wherever they could at the high speeds possible while fully loaded with kerosene. That's the reason why they chose planes going from East Coast to West Coast, because the plane would be fully loaded. I mean, this is not hard.
Etc. At least according to the coroner, what's his name? Wally Miller at the time. And actually, 20 years later.
You know his name because you keep mentioning it all the time. It's Wally Miller, right? It's Wally Miller. And you brutally take him out of context, which I'm going to show in a minute.
I mean, I played the video around the anniversary of 9/11 when he did one of his first interviews since, because he had done flack that he said that he got there and his job, you know, was basically to identify bodies, but there was no bodies to identify. Then, right, you know, the fact checkers came, the fact checkers of their days, the debunkers, and he kind of repositioned that, and he's like, well, we couldn't find him. But then if you listen to this interview, he says the same thing. He talks about the 8-mile debris field in New Baltimore, and we'll get there. And that's important because it couldn't have just blown there. It was over a mountain ridge. Okay, that means there had to be an event in the air. But then he says they basically just buried all the bodies underneath.
No, he doesn't say that. He actually says he buries the remains across the field, and there's no whole bodies. In fact, let me read you the report from the Washington Times, basically, because you won't do it because you're pretty much somebody who doesn't really tell the truth about anything. So this is basically Hollowed Ground, Washington Post, dated May 12, 2002 by Peter Pearl. And I'm going to quote to you. So we're going to read together. As coroner responsible for returning human remains, Miller has been forced to share with the families information that is unimaginable. As he clinically recounts to them, holding back very few details, the 33 passengers, 7 crew, and 4 hijackers together weighed roughly 7,000 pounds. They were essentially cremated together upon impact. Hundreds of searchers who climbed the hemlocks and combed the woods for weeks were able to find about 1,500 mostly scorched samples of human tissue totaling less than 600 pounds, or 8% of the total. Miller was among the very first to arrive after 10:06 on the magnificently sunny morning of September 11th. He was stunned at how small the smoking crater looked, he said, like someone took a scrap truck, dug a 10-foot ditch, and dumped all the trash into it. That's because the plane basically was reduced to molecules almost, small parts of the plane, because it exploded on impact going so fast. And like I said before, it's not an unusual anomaly. It is a unusual anomaly because we don't get to see intentional plane crashes in our lifetimes. And so, after 9/11, you had German wings 95-25, basically, where the pilot intentionally crashed into the side of the Alps. Go take a look at the debris field. It's similar to Shanksville. PSA 1771, where the plane broke the sound barrier. And basically, go take a look at the debris field. Looks similar to Shanksville. So, yeah, basically, Jason Bermas is being very disingenuous here.
That's not normal.
Of course it's not normal, because intentional plane crashes aren't normal, Jason Bermas, but you basically stop right there and you don't investigate further. Why is there very few plane debris at Shanksville? Why is there very few plane debris at the Pentagon? Well, let me see if there's other instances of plane crashes where there's very few plane debris. You would know that if you actually cared to bother to do some slight research on the subject of intentional plane crashes, and you did.
Bulldoze the bodies, and that it's just a...
They didn't bulldoze the bodies. They bulldozed the very small molecules that were left of the people. Like I said before, the plane actually impacted the ground at 563 miles an hour with 28,000 pounds of jet fuel on the plane. The back of the plane became the front of the plane in less than half a second. Half a second. Since the body is 90% liquid, basically water, you are expecting whole bodies to survive that? I mean, really, this is humorous to listen to, because anybody with any type of layman physics would know that you are not going to find even pieces of a whole hand. And what they found at Shanksville was a part of a backbone.
Mass grave there. That's not normal. Shanksville, Pennsylvania, especially, whether or not, no matter what you think happened there, I think there was an event in the air, and something was blown up in the air. And obviously, we had debris all over the place. I'm extremely skeptical of some of that debris, because that's where they get the narrative of the hijackers wearing red bandanas, for instance.
See, and there's another problem for Jason Bermas. How does light objects like a bandana, but a body can't? Well, if you don't know the difference between a very light object like a bandana, which weighs what, less than half a pound, not even, as opposed to maybe 160-pound body made out of water. God's sakes, man! This is not confusing. It's not very perplexing at all. You just have to think what paper can survive. In fact, that's actually what survived at Shanksville, Pennsylvania, because they found, I think Flight 93 was holding 22,000 pieces of mail, 22,000 pounds of mail. And basically that's what survived. In fact, light pieces of the plane, including the nylon, the fuselage, which was found at not 8 miles away, for God's sakes, in New Baltimore. Basically, what happened was when the plane actually blew up and you saw the huge cloud, parts of the plane actually that's light enough to float in the air basically landed in certain spots like New Baltimore, Newcastle. And so that's what they found. Very small objects of the plane actually survived. The biggest part of the plane actually was the piece of the engine that was found right at the impact crater.
Are you aware of this?
I'm aware of this, yeah.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, they actually presented in court, and you can go check out my videos on this, a unscathed folded bandana that somehow survives this plane crash, where again, 15 years later, the FBI, and I played this for Kevin Roos of the New York Times, if anybody wants to see it, to get his response, where all 3 FBI agents say one of them says there was literally no evidence of a plane there.
Which would be right, because they're used to seeing a plane actually trying to land. They've never seen an intentional plane crash in their life. That's the difference, Jason Bermas. That's the difference that you can't comprehend, and for no planers in general, that they can't comprehend. That there's a difference between a plane crash where the pilot is trying to land the plane and a plane crash where the pilot is intentionally crashing into the ground.
He goes, I looked to the left of me, right? There was no evidence a plane had crashed there, right? But they have another passport from the hijacker, right? They had a passport from the hijacker in New York City that survived that plane crash into it.
Which is not unusual. I mean, they found ID cards at Shanksville. They found a wedding ring at the Pentagon. There's small objects that can survive an explosion. It's called kinetic energy, where the explosion happens and everything gets pushed out. It's just not hard. Anything of weight is not going to survive. This is another problem with people at the Pentagon too. Oh, we should be able to see engines. I mean, really, do you think that this is like a Wile E. Coyote moment where he showed where he goes through the rock mountain and you see a silhouette? Is that what you're trying to? I mean, that's not normal. It's not normal. This is irrational at best. I mean, the plane is going at a high rate of speed, fully loaded with kerosene. It's a bomb. That's what it is. It's a bomb. And that's why they called it pent bomb, because it was a pent bombing. The plane actually is a bomb at that point. And it's not hard to understand this. Not hard at all.
You have an unscathed bandana that somehow they attest was attached to one of the hijackers' heads.
Well, they found CC Lyle's ID card. It was undamaged. Why don't you bring that up? Why don't you bring up the one passenger who was a taxi driver out of Florida? Forgot his name. If you Google Shanksville artifacts ID cards, you'll see that there's an ID card of a guy. He was actually a cab driver. He had white hair, he has glasses, and his ID card is uncaged. Why don't you talk about that too? Why don't you talk about something that's really a real good anomaly, where they found a business card belonging to Assem Al-Jara? Who's Assem Al-Jara? Well, I'm not going to root it for you. Why should I give you a nugget of gold when you deserve coal? See, this is the reason why I critique hard on people like Jason Bermas, Barbara Honegger, and Christopher Bolin, is that these guys basically absolve any type of government intelligence agency from even having foreknowledge. As long as these planes aren't hijacked, as long as there's no hijackers, you won't look into the backgrounds of intelligence services who were linked to these hijackers. And that's the reason why I start thinking in my head, like, these guys, are they doing it because they're ignorant, or are they misinforming people on purpose so you won't look?
Not burnt. There's no blood on it. There's not a head there.
How do you know? Maybe it was in his back pocket, right? So what happened was, according to the passengers' testimonies, some of them made phone calls where they said that there were 3 hijackers, dark-skinned males wearing red bandanas, right? Who knows? Maybe one of them took them off, put it on his back pocket. Maybe it was on his head. But again, you're trying to speculate, and you're not saying that you're speculating, which is quite misleading to the public that you're trying to reach. But maybe it fell off him. Maybe it was in his back pocket. Maybe he was holding it in his hand. You don't know.
I don't know exactly what happened, but I know that the FBI certainly has manufactured evidence after the fact before and
See, now that's a claim, right? So now, if you're going to say that the FBI manufactured evidence, you have to give evidence for that. Or say I'm speculating, but I think the FBI basically, threw evidence on the ground. Say you're speculating. Don't say this as a fact, because at the end of the video, he says, "Yeah, I speculate throughout the video." No, yeah, oh, okay, it's too late at the end, because what you're doing here is you're misleading people. Oh, he has information regarding FBI intentionally throwing evidence on the ground regarding Shanksville. All right, I want to see that information. But he doesn't have that.
Caught, right? And for instance, when we get to 77, Flight 77, and the Pentagon, for instance, you have Khalid al-Mihdhar as the supposed lead hijacker. Now, al-Mihdhar has fed prints all over him. Like this guy's living with and renting from FBI informants. But
the FBI informant that he's living with was in Lemon Grove, California. His name was Abdulsadah Sheikh. He had a code name named Stan. I did a video. I wrote an article about this. And his handler was a guy named Stephen O'Brien out of the FBI San Diego field office. But I don't know why you're bringing him up, Jason, because you don't believe he was on Flight 77, which is the disconnect, right? Who cares about Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, who were living with Abdulsadah Sheikh?
Another aspect that I don't think has been delved into enough with al-Mihdhar, other than the fact that I believe that you look at the flight data, the fact that they're saying there's no video at the Pentagon, I still think that's absolutely nonsense. Obviously, they have film of whatever hit the Pentagon.
Well, if you understood anything, you would know that the Pentagon was actually under renovation since the year 1999. The Pentagon renovation project, headed by Lee Evey. And the West Wing of the Pentagon, which was hit, was under renovation at the time. Complete renovation. So there's actually cameras on top of the roof. I think there was like 4, but actually they're not operable because the West Wing was under renovation. Now, let's just say that there is video. And I brought this up in Hanukkah's video yesterday. Would you believe it? Or would you actually think that, oh, you see, the government's actually superimposed a plane into the Pentagon? Like I said, I don't need a video. I don't need a video to know what happened. All I need to do is listen to the testimonies of people who were actually there. You're not going to do that, are you, Jason?
That happened, and then al-Mihdhar.
There's no evidence of showing a Titanic sinking into the deepest part of the Atlantic. Where's the video for it? Oh, there's no video? That means it didn't happen. I mean, just listen to how silly that is.
Was supposed to be part of this other cell, yet no one talks about the James Woods incident in August of 2001, right before, where he gave court testimony that he was on a plane with Khalid al-Mihdhar, and I believe the other hijacker he identified, this one I may get wrong, but I'm almost sure it was Nawaf al-Hamzi.
No.
Okay.
Muhammad
and they were not able to identify the other 2, but James Woods, the stewardess, and the pilot all filed reports they felt they were doing a dry run hijacking. Okay.
And so this is astonishing, right? Why would they do dry run hijackings if they're not on the planes, Jason Bermas? I mean, what's the point of having hijackers to begin with, right? To give the appearance that they hijacked the planes? Well, guess what? People on the planes that were hijacked called and said, hey, we're being hijacked. I mean, God sakes. Really, this is embarrassing to say the least. So, because that's what Jason believes. He believes that these planes were actually hijacked, but then they were swapped. And that's where he runs into the problem.
And this came out during the Dark Overlord documents. It was confirmed, and they.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, the Dark Overlord documents showed nothing of the sort. In fact, it was all hogwash. In fact, the guy even tried to get Bitcoin in return for taking these documents, which showed absolutely nothing. I have it down.
Name the FBI agent in it. I can't pull that one off the top of my head, but anybody can go watch my video, The Secret Testimony of James Woods, and we go through the document, which is basically James Woods's written testimony, but they have video footage of it, right? It's at these hearings in regard.
Like, why would you, if you're the planners of this operation, right? And you have, the plan is to have the planes hijacked and crash into selected U.S. targets. Why would you run the risk of being uncovered by having more people involved in the operation, which would be needed if you're going to have a plane swapped for a different plane, and then have the FAA, the NTSB, the FBI, and all the airline public employees basically saw the hijackers all basically lying, right? Thousands of people would have to be involved in New York, in Washington, in Pennsylvania, because they found pieces of the plane belonging to the hijacked airliners. You know, there was over 1,000 local, state, and federal investigators in the Pentagon. It was the largest investigation in Washington, D.C. history to this day, was what happened at the Pentagon on September 11, 2001. Are you telling me, Jason Bermas, that every single body who was involved in the search and rescue operations from the public level are basically in on it? Wow, what an astonishing revelation. You have evidence for that? Of course you don't. Because according to you, it sounds so reasonable and it sounds so plausible in my mind, it has to be real. I don't care what you believe. I want to know what you know. And so far, you know basically nothing. You haven't provided any evidence for your viewer in this interview so far.
Regards to lawsuits via Huntley, ICTS, even Kroll is kind of a part of it as well. These are the ones involving Silverstein Properties trying to make multiple lawsuits for multiple buildings. And basically,
and they lost. Silverstein Properties actually lost money, and they actually lost property rights. I love, this, this silly claim of Larry Silverstein actually making double his profits. He actually lost money regarding the attacks. He actually was awarded, I think, $4.6 billion awarded to his insurers. He tried to get the double of that because he tried to say that both of the towers were separate incidents of terrorist attacks. No, it wasn't. So during the rebuilding process, he took all that money that he won and through the insurance company, Silverstein Properties. And in fact, that wasn't the only group. There was another, I think it's Westfield or something like that. I'm sorry. No, Westfield was, is it Westfield? I think it's Westfield. Or there's another property rights owner. And they basically went to court and won the rights to rebuild the property, which is their right? So they rebuilt the property. Remember, World Trade Center 7 was owned by Silverstein, but the rest of the World Trade Center centers are belonging to Port Authority, and Silverstein rented from the Port Authority. And basically, he lost so much money that he lost property rights for One World Trade. In fact, the people who worked on the project sued Silverstein because they weren't getting paid on time.
3 out of the 5 dumps came out. There's still 2 dumps that never came out, but this one I thought was very important.
And they never came out. And those dumps never came out.
Al-Madar should have been nowhere near that plane. Remember, that's the Atta plane. And Atta has kind of been, promoted as the quote unquote lead hijacker. When we talk about the Pentagon in particular, right? I know there's this meme out there that, I'm still saying no plane hit the Pentagon after 14 years or 15 years. I just want to say, number one, that in 2005, when we put out Loose Change 2nd edition, and that one definitely went full board missile theory. I didn't really consider much else. We went back and took the profits that we had from that and did our own investigation where we went and we interviewed Bob Pugh in person. For those that don't know who Bob Pugh is, he's the guy that was on the lawn who took all that footage that you saw before.
Yeah, and he came after the fact.
Or the Pentagon's front end collapsed after the strike, right? So we sat down with him. We got all of his raw footage. We interviewed April Gallup.
Of course you did. April Gallup was inside the building. So you interviewed Bob Pugh, who came after the fact. You interviewed April Gallup, who's inside the building. And then basically in her second lawsuit, she tried to sue Osama bin Laden and American Airlines. And, for those who don't know, she basically did it because she said that if the other theories are correct regarding the Pentagon, I won in on it because I was a survivor. So let's just see who else.
We never put that interview out because April didn't want us to put it out there.
Who else did you interview?
But she's the one that literally walked through the hole with her child of where the Pentagon struck. We went and talked to Lloyd England. We did put that one.
Who was actually on the freeway and saw the plane. Well, let's see what
out there. Lloyd England is the gentleman who drove the cab and one of the telephone poles that came down right through. You know what's funny about that? You know what book he had in his car when that happened?
I don't.
David Icke's Children of the Matrix. He had the lizard person book in the back of his car. That's a real story. And Lloyd England was married to an FBI agent as well. Like,
no. 2021, you did this interview, and you still don't know that she worked for the FBI as a janitor. I think she was a cleaning lady. Holy God.
his wife was an FBI agent. Always found that interesting.
Before we get like,
okay, so you didn't bother to interview, say, Joel Schumacher, who worked for USA Today on his way to work and saw the plane hit the Pentagon. How about Stephen Boger, who was actually in the Sean Boger, who's actually in the firehouse right next to the heliport? Basically, he's right there. That said he saw the plane crash right into the West Wing. How about 87 other people who actually were outside, who actually saw the plane hit the Pentagon? Stephen McGraw, Father Stephen McGraw, which I played in the Hanukkah video. You didn't mention those people because they would actually contradict what you believe.
I mean, because we've been going.
That's the reason why you don't do it. You're not alone, Jason Bermas. Hanukkah doesn't do it. Christopher Bolin. These are very disingenuous people, and they won't ever talk about the eyewitnesses, the people who were actually there, right? Because it would interfere with their belief. Imagine what would happen to Jason Bermas if he actually reverses course and says, hey, you know what? Flight 77 really did hit the Pentagon and Flight 93 crashed in Shanksville. You know what would happen to Jason Bermas? Half of his Patreon account would leave him, and then they would label him a shill and a traitor forever. Because guess what that happened to? Guess who that happened to? David Chandler and Wayne Costi. David Chandler at one point was the face of the 9/11 truth movement regarding his infamous video regarding NIST and World Trade Center 7 coming down from free fall for a couple of seconds. He got, I don't know who the guy from NIST was, but he was after that, David Chandler was the most popular truth on face the earth. When he narrated Wayne Costi's 5-hour presentation regarding a plane at the Pentagon, he is now vilified for the rest of his life. And that's the reason why Jason Bermas, Barbara Honegger, Christopher Bolin, Rebecca Roth, CIT, and Craig McKee, and all those no-planers basically will never, ever change course because they'll know what happened to them. They'll be outcasts forever. Because God forbid, if you make a real sacrifice and tell the truth, right? The truth isn't popular, Jason Bermas. I should know better, right? I try to do it every day. And yeah, I'm a small channel. People really don't follow me. And that's because I won't ever change my mind. I'm not going to use speculation as a form of evidence. I'm going to promote as much facts as possible because people like you over the last 20 years have done so much damage to the 9/11 truth movement. It's irreversible. We'll never have a true, really educated truth movement where we can actually go to court and win a battle in court. That's the reason why the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry are basically at this stage arguing to be heard in the Southern District of New York, which they're going to lose. Because who's on the committee? A bunch of no-planers like Barbara Honegger.
Going on for a long time. I just want to ask you a couple things about Flight 93 because we went over that first.
Sure.
Are you familiar with Flight 1771 that crashed in California in 1987?
This was a while back. We tried to contact Jason Bermas regarding intentional plane crashes similar to Shanksville because he gave a challenge, and he was interviewed. He did an interview with a Esquire reporter by the name of John McDermott, and he basically said that if anybody could show me a plane crash scene similar to Shanksville, I'll stop showing the clips at Shanksville. His edited clips and loose change. And so me and DJ Thermal Detonator, a fellow 9/11 researcher, took it upon ourselves to do 2 separate incidents where a plane crash is similar to Shanksville. For DJ Thermal Detonator, he did PSA 1771, which was fantastic. I think that was better than mine. Mine was German Wings 9525. With PSA 1771, was even more fascinating about that. The guy who hijacked the plane was a guy with a gun, and he basically was an ex-employee, and he crashed the plane and broke the sound barrier in doing so, 700 miles an hour, which is unbelievable, right? Oh, these planes can't go that fast. Yeah, they can. They actually break their own the sound barrier when they're doing it. with Germanwings 9525. It was a pilot. It was actually the first officer who basically took over the pilot controls when the first officer when the lead pilot went to the bathroom, and he locked them out because the doors basically reinforced because of September 11, 2001, and he crashed into the side of the Alps.
All right. So listen, if that is the plane, that
so we showed these videos to Jason Bermas. Now with DJ Thermodetonator, he used his Patreon account. I don't have a Patreon account, so I used, I showed it through YouTube. And basically what happened was basically Jason Bermas had DJ Thermodetonator on block, wouldn't unblock him, and said, I don't care what he has to show. And he called me a troll. So basically, ever since then, I never took Jason Bermas serious ever again, because he doesn't want to hear a competing argument which can easily refute his points. And it doesn't take long. I mean, it doesn't take more than 5 minutes to look up this stuff and basically contradict a lot of these points that people like Jason Bermas and Barbara Honecker make. It doesn't take long. That's why these people don't debate. Jason Bermas will never debate me. Jason Bermas will never debate DJ Thermodetonator. If he's interested in popularity, he'll never debate Ryan Dawson, because Ryan Dawson has tried over the years, long years, to debate anyone, and nobody will ever debate him. These people don't debate. You'll never see a real debate between a 9/11 researcher and a 9/11 truther, right? It won't happen. In fact, the last time that happened was CIT actually debated Anthony Summers, who wrote the book, The 11th Day. And what happened was it was a crushing one-sided defeat. And Anthony Summers slaughtered Crank Ranky, slaughtered him. That's 2007 or 10. And that was the last time I ever saw a debate between a 9/11 truther and a 9/11 researcher. These guys, Jason Bermas, they'll never debate. They never, ever will. And I know, and Reed Coverdale, and this is not in this video because I edited it. At the end, Reed Coverdale says, "Hey, Jason, what about a debate in the future?" And Jason Bermas actually said, "I'll debate anybody." Well, guess what, Jason? I'm challenging you to a debate regarding either Shanksville, Pentagon, anything about 9/11. What do you want? I'll openly challenge you. And I don't want a huge audience. I just want me and you. And we'll have a moderator. How about Reed Coverdale? He's great. We both trust him. So he would be a perfect moderator. So that would be my challenge to you. I'll challenge you. Anything 9/11 related. How about the Pentagon and Shanksville? Or one or the other? Up to you. That's my challenge to you. You'll never take it. I'm telling you what you're going to say. You're saying, no, I'm not going to debate that guy. He's a troll. Even though I have a bigger 9/11 channel than you do, or you ever did. The only thing I don't have is I don't have a fiction called Loose Change at my disposal. It's not a documentary, it's a work of fiction. And, that's the one thing I don't have, right? And I don't care about a huge audience either. I'm not in this for money. I'm in this to try and repair what you damaged.
Said a gentleman who was, I believe he was supposedly a disgruntled worker.
Yes, that's the story. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about that, because, again, these people that love to attack me and say there's, I've talked about how there's no time in history that you had the kind of damage, and I will contend to stay with that was in Shanksville,
yeah,
Pennsylvania.
of course you can, because you don't know, and you're going to admit that you never looked into PSA 1771. You never looked into Germanwings 9525 or Egyptian Air, I think it's 715 or something like that, where it crashed into a high rise, and very few parts of the plane survived. But you don't research, Jason Bermas. I mean, you only look at information that caters to your worldview. That's all, and that's the problem with people like you, that you don't care about the truth of the matter. So the ex-employee that crashed 1771 is David Burt, and he was an ex-employee.
In other words, 8 Mile debris field, no bodies according to the coroner, all the FBI agents getting there saying they didn't see a plane.
That's right, and guess what? 1771 was the same. That's the reason why he's bringing this up. Germanwings 9525 was the same. That's why I brought it up.
Plane, then them not finding the bodies at all, and basically bulldozing the bodies. That is not what happened.
And you misquote Wally Miller, and you misquote what he said. He never says whole bodies. He says, I never saw whole bodies. I didn't even see a drop of blood. Why would he see drops of blood? Which is basically evaporated in the explosion.
In this case, let me say this.
Let me tell you, for those who don't know sports, there's a football player by the name of Jason Pierre-Paul, right? He's an excellent defensive end, outside. What is he? Defensive end, outside linebacker. He basically on July 4th, I think it was like 4 years ago, something like that. He had an M80 in his hand, and it blew up in his hand. Okay, and he basically looks like a claw. All right, that's what an M80 does. Basically, blew up his bone and his flesh. An M80. Compare that to a person inside a plane with 28,000 pounds of fuel going 560 miles an hour. What do you think is going to survive? Again, simple physics.
For those that don't know about that, I think that the contention was that they had one eyewitness come out and say, and because I've seen the clip, say that basically there was no evidence a plane had crashed there, right? And it was in little confetti pieces everywhere.
Mhm.
One person. Okay. I have in the Loose Change series alone at least 5-10 people saying that, right?
No, you don't actually. In fact, you take these people out of context. You actually quoted in the video, you actually used an excerpt, I think it was Fox News, where there's this guy, Spanish guy with glasses, and he says that from my vantage point, I don't see a plane crashing here. Where was he standing? Was he standing 50 feet from the impact hole? How about 100 feet? How about 300 feet? Where was he standing at that vantage point? Because that brings into fuller context. You just played the video, gave no context, and basically said, from my vantage point, I couldn't see a plane crash, because the narrative you're pushing is that a plane didn't crash there, right? You didn't manage to interview, say, Paula Pluta, who basically is a Somerset County resident who basically heard her house shake, went outside and said she saw the plane do a 90-degree nosedive into the ground. That's one person. Another one was Jackson. I want to say his name was Jackson, right? I'll get you the name. Something that Jason Bermas isn't going to do is that I will provide. You know what? Let's stop the video right. Let's just stop the share right here. Let's do this so that you could see it for yourself. Right? So I'm going to be screen sharing the article so that you could see what I'm seeing, what I'm reading to you. Okay, so this is from CBS Pittsburgh, and I'm going to blow this up a little bit. Okay, so this is dated September 6, 2011, right? Let's read from here. Okay. When the plane came through here, I could see the wingtips were vertical, Eric Peterson said in 2002. That's Eric Peterson. I could see the roof of the plane and the tops of the wings. It only took a couple of seconds to get from there over to there. I mean, it was probably 2 seconds at the very most. 9 years ago, Peterson told KDKA TV he was just about fed up with a year of strangers coming to quiet Stony Creek Township in search of the crash site. People want to come here to see other people's tragedy, all right? So Nevin Lambert can't change that he was the last person to see Flight 93 Airborne going inverted as it dove to its direction. It was going upside down. And all at once, it made the 45-degree angle, and it went right down where the big tree is, right where my finger is pointing, he said, in 2002. The conspiracy people can say what they want to say. There are always going to be that kind of people in the world who are not going to believe. But I know what I saw that day, and that's enough for me. Well, he's talking about you, Jason Bermas. He's talking about you. And you won't ever mention these people because they contradict your point of view regarding the Pentagon and Shanksville. And so, you know, that's your problem, not mine. Why would anyone listen to you? I'd rather listen to Eric Peterson. He was there. If I'm an investigator, investigating crime scene, I'm going to interview Eric Peterson. Why would I interview you? You're nobody. You weren't there.
And then now I have the FBI agents saying that 15 years later when they put out their own report. And by the way, I would encourage people to go watch that raw video because everybody knows that they say that that's the let's roll moment and they went and overtook the cockpit. Do you know where what that evidence is? I I mean, if I had the time, I'd go find it and play it for you. It's literally this.
No, it wasn't actually. In fact, the audio was long. The families, the victims' families, actually heard that cockpit voice recording, and they heard the conversation of the two people in the cockpit. And at the end, all they heard was wind. So again, you're disingenuous. You're not going to say to Reed Coverdale, because he doesn't know any better at the time, right, about the actual length of the cockpit voice recording, which was played for the victims' families at the Zacharias Moussaoui trial in 2006. In fact, what they heard was the Arabic. They didn't hear the English translated version. In fact, the English translated version is from the transcript, which is public. That's public.
That's what you hear. You don't hear any voices. You don't hear any.
Yeah. Why now you're being straight. Now you're lying, right? There is audio. The audio was played for the victims' families. They heard it. Why are you lying about this?
Tax. The FBI agent literally has to frame it like what we think is a struggle, but we don't know. Okay. Now, with
yes, there was a struggle. They got through the cockpit. They heard the violent struggle. And then at the end, they heard nothing but wind.
This case previously, right?
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to say, I just watched a documentary about it before we did this video, and there was a like 7 to 8 mile debris field with Flight 1771.
And you're talking about walking nautical miles. It wasn't long like that.
Yeah, and I am skeptical it was a guy with a gun in a crash. For those that don't,
you could be skeptical all you want regarding PSA 1771. You already have said, and you're going to say it again, that you didn't research into it.
No, they actually had to change a law after the fact because there were so many CEOs of large corporations. I believe it was an oil company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, where they had to change the law. They couldn't travel together in case a disaster like that had happened. So again, with that large of a debris field, with a scenario that they never really proved that it was a man with a gun that went crazy.
No, they did prove it. The FBI actually proved it. I mean, God's sakes, Jason, really. The Inspector General report is actually available for anyone to view. It's public online.
That had inside help apparently to get in, right? To get onto the plane and have that weapons. And by the way, when you talk about 9/11, Time is the first one to put out 9/11 an inside job and talk about how there were weapons planted on those planes.
Well, this guy on Flight 1771, he got fired, and then the same day he went on the plane, he still had all his credentials. Like he didn't have to go through normal security. And they got the black box of him say, they hear all the gunshots, they hear him talk to the flight attendant right before he shoots her, and then both of the pilots too. I mean, I don't know how much further you've dug into this.
I mean, exactly. I can't contend to be an expert at all.
There you go. But yet he's willing. If you heard him like 2 minutes earlier, he basically says, "I doubt that actually happened." The guy with the gun. When he's basically saying, "I never really looked into it." You can't make this stuff up.
Oh, on that, I looked into what I could find pretty briefly. Obviously,
and that's it, right? If you hardly know about a specific incident, but yet you're willing to promote that, oh, maybe that incident really didn't happen. I don't think it really happened. And then at the end say, you know what? I really didn't look into it. Why would anyone treat you seriously?
I knew the base story of it and kind of the questions. But from what
what happens is the documentary that I watched, this guy gets fired because he gets caught on a security camera stealing from, I think it's from the refreshments fund on the airplane. Like he steals cash out of it, but he also has a history of crime. So his boss fires him. And then that same day, he knows the plane that he's going to be on flying to San Francisco. So he goes to his locker, gets his gun, and he gets on the plane, and then he actually writes a letter on, this is also interesting just because of the passport and everything. It's all kind of connected to this, but he writes a letter on an airsick bag to his boss saying like, it's kind of ironic. We both ended up on this flight. You ruined my day. I'm going to ruin yours. Something like that. He writes it out and he drops it in his lap as he goes by. And then he goes into the bathroom, comes out with his gun, and then he shoots the boss twice. And then he shoots the pilots and the flight attendant. And then he puts the plane in a nosedive and it crashes at like 700 miles per hour. There's no bodies, no big pieces of the plane anywhere. The guy shows up, the investigator, he shows up and he can't find any bodies anywhere, which was shocking to him. Can't find any pieces of the plane, just paper all over the place because I think it carried.
Yeah, I saw the one investigator say that part of it, but again, I didn't watch the whole document.
See, there you go. Then how can you say legitimately that there's no plane crashes similar to Shanksville if you've never looked into it? The reason why you didn't look into it, because you're going to find out that that is exactly what happened at Shanksville, right? Similar plane crashes, where intentional plane crashes left behind very little evidence of a plane crash, right? And then you have to say, if you're actually honest with yourself, you better say, wow, I made a mistake, that there are similar plane crashes. And I have to retract what I have to say. And that's the reason why you never looked into it. That's the reason why you have DJ's reserve name on block and you call me a troll and you won't ever look at anything that I'll share with you. But don't go challenging people if you're going to say, well, my challenge is to find any similar plane crash to Shanksville. Well, we showed you each one. We showed you a different one that is similar to Shanksville. And then you have the nerve actually to say, I never looked into it.
Oh. That's one person.
When sure. I recommend the whole documentary.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
I'd certainly look at it. But again, when
no, you're not.
You know, I saw the circumstances of that. And look, I have no idea what this guy's history it is. Maybe that is what happened. But when you have that large of a debris field, I mean, and again, there was no mountain ridge to go over there. I believe it crashed into like nosedived into a mountainous area, correct? Correct. Yes. So it was already a high elevation there, right? So higher elevation.
Well, Germanwings 95 crashed into the mountains over a mountain region. And they found debris over on the other side of the Alps. Wonder how they got there. Physics, right? The wind, light plane.
And probably a bigger spread down, you know, when you're talking about, again, a field that is not a mountainous region. And somehow it goes 8 miles in the other direction over a mountainous region. I think that's a problem.
Clouds and wind, how does it work, right? How does it work? Like I said, look at the debris field that they found in New Baltimore. Like things this big, small little objects.
And that debris is indisputable, and it's something the debunkers never want to talk about.
Wrong, because now I'm not a debunker, so I'm a skeptic, right? So what happens is, Jason, is that when the explosion happened at Flight 93, right, the explosion, enormous cloud. In the cloud is debris. Now, there's video shot by a guy on a freeway, and you can see the cloud basically traveling into the sky for miles. For miles. In that cloud is debris of the plane. Plane crashes. Explosion happens into the sky. Mushroom cloud. Hundreds of miles into the air. Along with it, all the light objects of the plane traveling with the cloud into the wind. That's how you got your debris field. And it's also not a first time.
Okay. I know that some have talked about it after the fact, but they, you know, the official like popular mechanics people, right? They just say Indian Lake. They don't even acknowledge that it was in New Baltimore. So here's my problem. It's like the same thing with the controlled demolition stuff, right? And especially with 1 and 2. They won't acknowledge that Peter Bakarski, the head of FEMA in New York on September 16th, said that there was temperatures of 2,700 degrees, right? Instead, the debunking point is, oh, these guys say jet fuel doesn't melt steel beams, but it doesn't have to. It just has to weaken them, and they weaken at 1,500 degrees. In other words, we're not going to acknowledge there were any temperatures of 2,700 degrees. Debunked.
Well, I mean, let's just say, for example, in 1993, the World Trade Center bombing, where the hole went down, I think, 3 levels underneath the ground of the basement levels of the world of the North Tower, right? And that was from a urea nitrate bomb, okay? And it was, I think it was like 8 canisters filled with urea nitrate, nitroglycerin, and whatnot, right? I forgot the other chemicals. The explosion happened, and when the fire department came there, they basically said that the heat emanating out of the hole was enough to where steel was actually softening, and the rebar basically was twisted, was melted, right? One fireman actually almost fell into the hole, and he said that the heat basically, and he's like 3 stories up. Now, so imagine 3 stories up, and you see the bottom of the hole. He said it looked like hell, and it was all glowing red. Now, that's just from a truck bomb, okay? Filled with metal, debris, and other cars and whatnot, because that's the basement levels where everyone was parking, okay? Just imagine a freaking plane and 110 stories. Imagine what the hole looked like. You know how much damage it was at the bottom of the World Trade Center? It broke the basement. Now, there's what we call the basement, right, underneath the World Trade Center, because here's the World Trade Center. Underneath are the floors of the basement levels. And underneath that is called a place called the basement. And that's what's protecting the Hudson River from going into Lower Manhattan. And they said that when the towers fell, it basically cracked the basement, concrete levels. And that they feared that the water from the Hudson River would basically flood Lower Manhattan, because that's what would happen. If you could take pictures, there are pictures of Chambers Street, the subway station, which is underneath the World Trade Center. Go look at those pictures. You could see the roofs crashing right into the tunnels. The damage that was caused, if it broke through the train station, it would break through to the basement. It's unbelievable, the damage. Now, just imagine, at the bottom of this is all the heat, the emanating heat. Now, whether there was explosives involved, I think there were. But that's speculation. I can't prove that. I think at the basement levels there were, because that's how you would probably soften like the building to come down if you wanted to, because the destruction of World Trade Center had to happen. They had to have collapsed on a symbolic basis. Can you imagine the planes actually crashed in World Trade Center and the Trade Center actually stood? What that would mean is, hey, we took your best shot and we survived. But with the destruction of the World Trade Center, it's symbolic, saying that we can defeat your biggest and best buildings, which is symbolic of we can get to you anytime and destroy you. Because when that happened, when the World Trade Center collapsed, it basically changed New York forever, the mannerisms. We're no longer a very arrogant people. And it wasn't just arrogance. We were very proud people. I live in New York. And so they get this, we get people that who are tourists. They come here, well, New York is fast-paced. They're very arrogant. I can understand why they say that. But there's this air of confidence. We're the economic power. We got the biggest buildings in the world. When the World Trade Centers collapsed, it basically told us that we're not as tough or secure anymore. So that's why I believe, David Chandler once said to me, he said, the towers really had to collapse because on a symbolic basis, it showed defeat of the American aura. And it basically did. I agree with that. So, yeah, I don't know anything about physics. I don't talk about the collapse of World Trade Center because I won't know what I'm talking about, pro or con. So that's why I leave it alone, because I don't know anything about it. But I believe, and it's speculation, that I believe that there were like explosives in the basement levels. They tried it in '93. And World Trade Center was always a target, even before '93, even from non-religious Arab actors, like the Abu Nidal organization.
That's how I feel about it. You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying, but at the same time, like, it seems like the goalposts shift because, like,
Yes,
there's
they do.
no
Thank you, Reed.
other. The claim that a lot of people make is there's no other time in history
Right.
where a plane has crashed and you can't find large pieces of the plane, you can't find bodies.
There isn't. And listen,
he just told you one. He just told you one, and you basically said, I never really looked into it.
Again,
Hold on. But,
if we're talking about a mountain range, if we're talking about a mountain,
See, no, that has nothing to do with it, mountain range or not. Okay, you said in that interview with John McDermott, you said, "Show me a plane crash site similar to Shanksville, and I'll stop showing those clips." That's what you said. That's your words, not mine. And me and DJ Detonator basically showed you 2 separate plane crashes where there was very little debris and no whole bodies.
10 range, we're talking about rock, number one. We're not talking.
No, we're not talking about that. Now you're moving to, as Reed said, you're moving the goalpost. You said, "Show me a crash site similar to Shanksville." Word for word, you said that.
Talking about soft soil, correct? This was
yeah,
an
but when you're
open
going,
field.
when you're going,
We are talking about 2 different things. And secondly, again,
You know what? Hold on. You know what I'm going to do for you? I'm going to play that video. Let me see if I can find it. I don't want to waste too much time with it, right? So where should I, is this it? Okay, yeah, this is it. God, thank God I saved this clip. All right, so I'm going to show you what he said. This is what he said. Okay, here.
Plane crash,
This is McDermott. Here's Bermas.
and the plane and the bodies aren't there and visible. There's a problem, and that debris
They
field is a
found subsequently. So are you saying that the subsequent debris and remains of the bodies that were found?
No, I'm saying that the chances are, hold on, I'm saying that the chances are likely, because it's an 8-mile debris field, right? Because they found not only that, but identification and all that other stuff. You could easily say that those bodies were identified.
Let me fast forward. Let me wait.
Well, again, man, I'm going to say it. There's not a time in history that a jet goes down in an open field and you may have people that don't have heads or are badly burned. You got the body, bro. You got maybe a torso was ripped. It's not like they're looking for fragments and they're not on the scene. If you could point to one other commercial plane crash where anybody who is a primary investigator and shows up, and we've showed multiple, says there's no bodies and no evidence of a plane, I will not only shake your hand, I will stop showing people those clips.
Now, I made a video regarding this. Well, let's hold up that statement, province, which, right? So I'll fast forward. 9/11.
Flight's final moments, clues on which to build.
This is Germanwings 9525, which crashed into the Alps. Okay? Here.
Even without the hope of survivors, this is an urgent task. Piecing together what happened here, it seems near
where's the large piece of
impossible.
plane?
And how to do it
Where
when
is
there
it?
are so
Where's the
many
plane?
pieces. And yet from such devastation, investigators have started to salvage the first hints of the flight's final moments, clues on which to build.
Where's the plane?
One piece in particular might begin to present answers. One of the flight's 2 black boxes, damaged, but it turns out still very relevant.
Well, that's exactly what happened at Shanksville. In fact, those black boxes turned out to be in a little bit better shape than these. Look, where's the plane? Look at this. Look, here we go. Where's the plane? Where's the whole body? Here, it is. I took this article, right? French police attempting to formally identify the 150 victims of Germanwings 9525, which crashed in the Alps, have found between 400 and 600 remains at the crash site. Sounds familiar? That's exactly what they found at Shanksville almost. We haven't found a single body intact. Well, take a look at that, Jason. How about that? See, I'll just stop playing this, and that's the end of that. So, yeah, Jason, there's your problem. Your problem is that right there, and you basically are just somebody who won't look at evidence which basically contradicts your point of view regarding 9/11. You just won't do it. You just won't do it.
In this region, I think that's a problem. And that debris is indisputable, and it's something the debunkers never want to talk about. Okay.
I think it's a little different, but we don't know if someone was actually wearing it or if it was just on the plane. Like, when one thing smells fishy, to throw it all out because this,
or how they identified those bodies in that other situation. And secondly, again, I haven't done a ton of, if I've got to dig into this one, I guess I will. But what I've seen,
If I got to dig into, he's talking about PSA 1771. If I got to dig into this, I will. That's what we tried to do with you. And this is, what was it, 2 years ago? 2 years ago.
one eyewitness say that. One. It wasn't the newscaster on the scene. It wasn't the coroner. It wasn't the entire FBI team that was sent there. All right. All I'm saying is that maybe that's the case, but I know that's the case here in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. No doubt about it. And
You're wrong.
as far as bodies there, I don't know what they did with those bodies or how they identified those bodies in that other situation. But here, they had very little pieces. And again, they bulldozed a field with supposed bodies under.
No, they didn't. Why are you taking Wally Miller out of context? He never says that. He never says that. They buried the rest of the remains because they were so small. And basically, that's what would happen. A body would be reduced to like microscopic pits. That's exactly what happened to them. I mean, you are just, man.
Again, not something they did not do, as far as I know, in this other case. But again, I haven't studied it. So yes,
of course you didn't. He contradicts himself constantly in this video. It's amazing. Oh, I didn't study it, so I don't know what they found or didn't find. But yet you can safely assert that, oh, that situation may not have happened the way it is. Meanwhile, you never studied it.
there is no other
Well,
plane.
listen, anybody out there who's watching, this video, my takeaway for you is this, is that always listen to what these people have to say. Listen to the words. It's one thing to listen, but to listen to the words in which they say it. It's the mannerisms.
Crash in history like this one. I will say that over and over again.
You can't say that because you basically just said that I never looked into PSA 1771. You never looked into Germanwings 9525, and now you have. Well, I don't know if you're ever going to watch this video. I doubt you will. But I know some people that know you will watch this video.
Again, period.
Okay, I'm just saying there is one where there are no bodies found, no large.
According to one person.
No, according to dozens of investigators who were on the site, in which you said, on your own words, I never really looked into.
According
No. There's you got to watch the documentary. Like
I will watch the documentary.
I'll send it to you.
And I will totally watch it.
All right, but the other thing that's interesting, and I don't like with the bandana thing. I think that's a little sketchy too, especially if it was around someone's head. If it wasn't around their head, I think it's a little different, but if it's, we don't know if it was someone was actually wearing it or if it was just on the plane. Like,
exactly.
When one thing smells fishy, to throw it all out because this, you don't know if that.
Reed speaking rationally here. That's exactly right. Just because it sounds fishy doesn't mean that we can automatically assume that it's basically fabricated.
It was an extra bandana they had, or if it was some other passenger's bandana, you just don't know. So just for them to claim it was around the hijacker's head is kind of weird, but also to say like that disproves the whole story, I also think is weird. But with the, with IDs and passports and things like that, with this plane crash that I'm talking about, 1771, paper is what survives. Like anything heavy is pulverized because they're going so fast. All the light material gets blown out into the air and floats around. So, like finding IDs on the ground, although it sounds ridiculous at first, it's really not.
Well, I don't think all IDs. Let me make sure that I kind of give this a caveat. I'm saying that they have another. They're just so lucky that they get another passport from the hijack.
Why would it be? Well, they have luggage of Muhammad Atta Abdulaziz Al-Amari at Logan. They found the rental cars parked in the parking lot of these airports. I don't hear you saying anything unusual about that either. What about the people who worked in the airline industries, such as Dulles, like Alex Vaughn, who basically gave the boarding pass to Muhammad Atta and Abdulaziz Al-Amari? Is he a liar? What about Michael Tuhey? He worked at the Portland International Airport, where that's the connecting flight. He saw Muhammad Atta and Abdulaziz Al-Amari. What about the airline stewardesses on the planes? Amy Sweeney, Betty Young. Hey, we're being hijacked. Come on, man.
On that
Yes.
scene. And the absurd one to me would obviously be the World Trade Center, where you would think that absolutely nothing could have survived that.
Why not? Look, let me just say the passport they found was belonging to Satam al-Saskami. He was on board Flight 11. He's basically the guy who's alleged to have stabbed Daniel Lewin, the Israeli counterterrorism officer, because he was sitting behind him. Now, initially, in the initial reports of American Airlines, the initial draft report, this is not the original report, it's a draft report, said that Daniel Lewin was shot. That would mean that there were weapons planted on these planes, which you alluded to earlier in the video, which is exactly, hey, guess what? That's right. That's the reason why you had security personnel at Dulles, like Eric Gill, who basically said he saw who saw two of the hijackers. On September 10th. And they tried to get through to the tarmac. 3 of them were dressed as airline employees, and 3 in civilian clothes. And later on, when he was interviewed by the FBI, they showed him pictures. He said, I saw these 2 guys, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Marwan al-Sheikhi. Now, I wouldn't say he's lying. What were they doing there? Maybe they were planting weapons on these planes, because there were reports by CNN in the days after 9/11 where they said they found knives, box cutters taped to the backs of food trays on board these planes. And then you had the dragnet by the FBI regarding the Arabs who were trying to enter JFK after the ban was lifted on September 13th. One was trying to board as a pilot, and he was a relative of Osama bin Laden. Yet additional hijackings that didn't transpire on September 11th, like United Airlines Flight 23. In their luggage, 3 guys basically arguing with the flight stewardess about not flying, because they got word from the CEO, Gerald Arpey, who basically said no planes are to fly out. And then there was the national stand-down order afterwards. And 3 men got up and they started arguing with the flight stewardess, and they basically left. And the luggage that was found on the plane belonged to those 3 guys, and the luggage had Al-Qaeda manual in it. Separate incident, I guess.
And matching that up. When you talk about IDs, for instance, I don't think that CC Lyles somehow survived the situation. And I know that her ID is on the scene there. You know what I mean? I've looked at a lot of the evidence, and that's my point. What is genuine and what isn't? We do know that papers obviously survive from that. That's the majority of what
you don't get to say what is not genuine or genuine, right? What is genuine is what is reported, right? It's your assertion that some things aren't genuine. Well, now it's up to you to prove that. You don't have the luxury. But you actually have for you, it's the convenience. But for others like myself, you're not going to get away with it. I'm actually going to challenge you. If you're going to say that the passport was planted in Manhattan regarding Satam al-Saskami, you have to prove it. Prove it. And if, by the way, if that actually is planted by some agent of the government, right? Why didn't they make it an Iraqi passport? Because that's where we went to war. Satam al-Saskami's passport was issued in Riyadh at the consulate, the American consulate. Why would they say that he was from Saudi Arabia and not from Iraq? Did they not go for the script? Good.
was found in New Baltimore.
Right.
But when you talk about the Indian Lake sites and beyond, there's a lot more substantial stuff that they say that was found in the.
No, why don't you tell the truth? Okay. Let me show you the picture. Indian Lake debris field. New Baltimore. Right? New Baltimore. Trying to find that one picture of the woman where he uses. Right? I can't find it. And I'm not going to waste, all my time. Looking for it. Maybe if I do Shanksville debris. I'm looking, but I can't find the damn picture. No, can't find it. Well, I can't find the picture. I tried, but and I'm not going to waste so much time on it because it's just ridiculous at this point. So let's see, is there an article? No. I can't find it, but yeah, the debris was really small.
If the plane had been shot down or blown up or something, to me that would seem surprising that there wouldn't be large pieces of the plane. Because when a plane gets shot out of the sky, or if it
Exactly.
randomly crashes, or especially if it's
I'm sorry. Wait a minute. I gotta. What am I doing here? What am I doing here?
to land, then you have like large pieces of the wings, the fuselage all over the place. The only other time that I've seen in history when a plane is like so indistinguishable and gone is when it was intentionally driven into something, which is so rare. We almost never see that happen. So in the rare case that it does, it seems like this actually points to that it was rammed into the ground as hard as it possibly could be. I mean, if it was shot out of the sky, you don't think.
First of all, I didn't even say it was shot out of the sky. Let me make sure that we
Sure,
get there.
okay.
I think it was an air event. One of the things that's almost never considered is could have it been blown up with explosives inside. Whatever it was. If you remember, the hijackers all said they had bombs, right? We have a bomb on board. Everybody stay calm. I'm not saying that's the case either. What I'm saying is it looks like an air event to me. The shock wave that went, 15 miles that, one individual, I think it must have been 10 years, maybe a little bit more than 10 years after. And it's one of the only videos of the cloud that happens after the event. We had that picture for the longest time, right? But in that video, I think I played it when I was doing the Shanksville piece around the, what is it now? On the 20th anniversary of 9/11. He talked about that shockwave. The event looks like in the sky for me, and again.
So this is my question. If it was blown up in the sky,
yeah,
wouldn't you find big pieces of the wings and the fuselage? I mean, that's why it seems like it was, because honestly, Jason, like before Ryan Dawson got me into 9/11 truth or whatever, but before that, like I bought the official narrative. The thing I was skeptical about was the Flight 93 story. I was like, this sounds like propaganda, to make us all feel good about America or whatever. So I was totally there. Like I was totally questioning Flight 93, that they didn't shoot it down or that it wasn't blown up or something. The only reason I believe that, or not the only reason, but the biggest reason I believe it was driven into the ground is because there's like almost nothing left of it, such small fragments of it. If it had been blown up in midair, I feel like you would be finding all these big pieces all over the place. Because that's, like even in Loose Change, they were talking about the plane that got bombed. Like those were examples of images they were using. The planes that got bombed in midair, there were large pieces of the fuselage all over the place. The only time you see the plane basically vaporized is when, it's driven right into the ground like that.
Look, Reed, I'm going to say it again. I don't believe that. And I also am not so sure that that's Flight 93 that exploded up there. I think, I want to say this. I think all those people involved in the 4 official planes that were hijacked that day, right? Because we also had many quote unquote phantoms that day. They found weapons on other planes. You had the United, I believe, 52 incident where people actually got on the plane and then left, and they had the exact same types of luggage that
It's flight 23, actually. They made a simple mistake.
didn't make it on flight 11 that was attributed to ATA, right? We're talking about
Mhm.
these types of manufactured evidence. And then I'll clearly say it. I still believe that the video evidence to me strongly shows that whatever hit towers 1 and 2 were not flight 11 and 175, period. I do believe drones were used. I think real hijackings happened.
Remember what he says here. Listen to what he says carefully. I'll play back 10 seconds.
Shows that whatever hit towers 1 and 2 were not flight 11 and 175, period. I do believe drones.
I do believe. I believe. Remember what I was talking about earlier in the Hanukkah video and here regarding belief and knowledge. This is the key in understanding anything. It could be 9/11, it could be 1993, it could be World War, any event in history, anything. The key to belief, the key is what is true and what is not. I don't care what he believes. That's not my concern. My concern is knowledge, because we can act on knowledge. What information is he using to assert that both flight 11 and 175 were drones? That's what I want. Because he basically said that he believes that the planes that hit the World Trade Center, which is 11 and 175, were drones. Okay. The next question would be for him, what information do you have that shows that 11 and 175, which were hijacked, because he says that they were hijacked, but that they were swapped in midair? What evidence is there? And then how did the debris of 11 and 175 land in the ground zero?
Were used. I think real hijackings happened. I think that's where the evidence points. I think that, for instance, when you have that first report of gunshots on, I believe it's flight 11. Are you aware of that?
No, not off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's the report I was talking about. That's the initial report of American Airlines, that Daniel Lewin was shot. But then Jane Garvey, who's the regional FAA director, she basically says that that report was wrong. But where did whoever wrote that report, and it doesn't say who wrote the report, the draft report, basically, where did they get that information from? Did he just make it up out of nowhere? And in Betty Young's phone call, interestingly enough, it was over 20-something minutes, but yet only public is 7 minutes of it. That's interesting.
I've probably read it, but yeah.
So again, with the Dark Overlord documents, one of the things that came out were the drafts for the 9/11 Commission report. And finally, in this draft, the reports of the gunshot make the draft, and then who they were reported to.
That's actually, first of all, that's not new. This report was actually predated the Dark Overlord's release. I got it. So I have a hard drive filled with information and files, thousands of tens of thousands of files and documents. Okay. Now, I downloaded that stuff years prior to when I heard anything about Dark Overlord. I don't know why you keep bringing this guy up. He basically had nothing to release, nothing to show, and he was doing it for a price. He actually was threatening, I don't know who he was threatening from, but whatever he stole the documents from and whatever, he tried to steal that for a price of Bitcoin. Does that tell you like he's actually somebody who's trying to inform the public about the truth? He did it for a price. And the stuff that he released, go look at it. Nothing revealing.
First time. I believe it was Eric something or other, but the first time I read which official got that call. Now, the question is, were there guns on these planes? I mean, I don't necessarily believe that it was box cutter.
What does it matter? Even let's just say, all right, you believe that the planes were hijacked. You believe there were guns on board. What does that matter? Why is that a big deal? Because to you, all that doesn't mean anything because they were swapped in midair for drones. Why would they need to do that? Why would you involve so many more people in the operation other than allowing the hijacked planes to crash wherever they did? Now, I don't dismiss the speculation or the scenario involving remote control hijacking of the planes without the hijackers even knowledge. That very well is a plausible scenario to ensure that the planes actually crashed where they were. But for you to sit there and basically say that the planes were swapped for drones which were outfitted to look like Boeings, first of all, drones aren't the size of Boeings, not even in today's date. They aren't that big. So there's that problem. And other than that, why would you threaten to blow the whole case open by involving so many more people in the public sector? That means people, like I said before, like in the FAA, the NTSB, the FBI, airline employees, all have to be in on it. Thousands of people.
Used by these people. The Time magazine article called Inside Job says that there were other weapons found on other planes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, you had the drills going on, not only that day, but prior, right? Amalgam Virgo would be a great example of that, where they took a commercial jet and they were going to fly it into what was, I believe, the Capitol, not the White House, right? I'm pretty sure it was the Capitol, not the White House. It was on the cover. But during that red and blue war game, you also had UAVs and you had other types of attack. You actually had, I believe there were surface to air missiles there as well. So you had all this chaos going on. That the war games were going on throughout the day. Okay, again, one of the great,
listen, you deviated from the biggest point that you made in the video, that the planes were swapped in midair for drones. Where did you get that information from? I want documentation showing this. How about video evidence? You don't have that? How about documentary evidence? Eyewitness evidence. Eyewitness from the ground saying, hey, I saw a switch happening at the airport, or I saw a switch in the air. You don't care to mention, say, for example, Flight 175, United Airlines Flight 175, which basically the transponder was turned off, but the radar works, right? So people at air traffic controllers from Indianapolis, from New York, from Washington, from Logan, all these people had to be in on it because they didn't lose the planes. Yeah, the transponders turned off. They don't know where the altitude of the plane is, but they had the radar. And I mentioned this in the Hanukkah video. There's two ways you could still track a plane while the transponder is turned off. And one of them is through ground radar and satellite radar. And they track these planes, but they become blips now. But they didn't lose the plane. So that means all the people in charge of that monitoring device, the FAA, or air traffic control, right? They basically have to go along with the operation saying, you know what? The planes were actually, blips, and they were drones. Knowing that they were drones, but then they had to say that they were the hijacked planes. Can you imagine this? How could you go about proving that? You can't, because there is no documentation of this anywhere in the world. Nothing. So why would you make this statement? Unless you are doing it on purpose, or unless you are really ignorant about this subject. It's one or the other. Am I missing a scenario? Either you're intentionally misleading the public, or you're unintentionally misleading the public, where you don't even realize it. That could be very well the case with you, I think. But then again, you are friends with Alex Jones, who I'm absolutely convinced is an intentional agent of disinformation. And he is the godfather of 9/11 disinformation. The fact that you're friends with him.
Bunker claims is that all these drills stopped as soon as that first plane hit the World Trade.
Wrong. In fact, none of the drills stopped. They all stopped until after the attacks happened. That was ordered on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. All the exercises were still ongoing, even with the hijackings going on. That's why you have that audio that infamous audio regarding Flight 11, where the guy says, "Hey, we need you to scramble some jets up there. This guy's not calling back." And the guy basically says, "Is this real world or exercise?" Because at the time, as you alluded to, there are a number of exercises going on.
Center. That's not the case. If you go into the NORAD tapes, which we were like the first people to get after Vanity Fair, right? I remember Vanity Fair did a piece on them. We got it. It was clear.
Which is one of the best Vanity Fair pieces I've ever seen. It's the NORAD tapes. It's a fascinating collection. I have all the audio, and it's anyone can have it. It's public, but all the audio for NORAD.
Clear that they continued to call into Cheyenne Mountain, the underground base where people are extremely isolated, and have them take the Phantoms off. And that continued up to 20 minutes. It was 20 minutes after Flight 93 had supposedly crashed that happened, right? And then we see all the attacks cut off. So to me, you know that you had Phantoms, okay? You know that they had used...
No, you don't have Phantom planes. You have people who are confused about which plane is which because the transponder was turned off. It's not, it doesn't mean that there were Phantom planes or Phantom blips that you're alluding to. Nobody says that. Where do you get this from?
UAVs and amalgam Virgo that was so many like these other drills, Vigilant Guardian, Northern Vigilance, etc. You know they were running apocalypse drills that day because you have the E-4Bs themselves, not only at the scene of the Pentagon right after the attack, but at the scene of the World Trade Center. Clearly an E-4B is in the air before the second plane strikes. All right.
Okay. Again, no, there was the chemical weapons training facility at the right near the World Trade Center. No, it's a couple miles north of the World Trade Center. I forgot the name. I used to hang out there with when I was younger. We used to go by the river there, the Hudson River, and that was like in the early '90s when we used to hang out and listen to music. I forgot I can't think of it. Anyway, that area is where they had FEMA was staging a biological chemical weapons attack. Staging for that. I forgot the name of the program.
I don't contend to know exact. I mean, we're 42 minutes into this, and we've talked about a lot of physical anomalies and drills and things like that.
No, you speculated most. Most of everything you said was speculation, and you didn't even bother to inform your viewers what you were speculating on. You just said it like it was a statement of fact.
But for me,
that's where the disingenuous part comes in.
You know, everybody always asks me at the end of the day, well, what do you think happened, right? And the best answers I tell people is I think that this was an international intelligence operation with role players in Saudi Arabia. That's where you kind of got the funding and the fronting of getting a lot of these guys over. They were able to use their embassy to bring them over as Central Intelligence Agency assets. You had the Pakistani ISI angle of that, right? So then you could funnel some of this money with our allied network that was kind of Mujahideen, Osama bin Laden, anti-Soviet from the late 70s, early 80s spillover, right? And that's basically General Mahmoud
Mahmoud Ahmed was the Director General of the ISI, who is alleged to have given $100,000 to a Pakistan militant who had connections with the ISI and the British MI6, Omar Saeed Sheikh, who allegedly gave that money to Muhammad Atta. And a couple of days, I think it was a day or two later, Ahmed resigned from his position mysteriously.
Man, why am I killing this? Who is it? Mahmoud Ahmed? It's killing me.
No, I mean, you got it right. Mahmoud Ahmed.
Yeah. But the head of the Pakistani ISI wires out $100,000 just before the attacks. Is in D.C. on the morning of the attacks, meeting with all the key players, including Joe Biden, by the way. Met with him on, I believe it was 3 days after September.
Was it Biden or was it Portergoss and Bob Graham? I think that was them. That's who he was meeting with in Manhattan to talk about who? Osama bin Laden. Coincidence? What a coincidence that would be, huh? Portergoss is actually the co-chair of the Joint House Inquiry and the former CIA director. Bob Graham is actually co-chair of the Joint, one of the high-ranking chairs of the Joint House Inquiry as well as the House Intelligence Oversight Committee.
September 14th, Biden gets on TV and brags about it, right? His right-hand man is now been released and is in a safe house over in the UK, right? This is, man, I'm usually killing with names and I'm not doing a great job. Omar Saeed Sheikh. Okay, Omar Saeed Sheikh is the guy.
It's hard. It's hard. This is one thing I can relate with Jason Bermas. Remembering Arab names is very hard. And I work concierge security at a high-rise in a business center, and I have a coworker who knows what I do at my leisure. And and I tend to forget regular names like Jim or Thomas. And she basically said, you know, it's amazing you can remember these Arab names, but you can't remember American names. Why don't you make believe that everybody at the job is basically housed in Guantanamo? You can remember their names. And I thought that was funny. Elizabeth, you're quite something.
Guy that they blame the Daniel Pearl murder on. He's the guy that Benazir Bhutto says murdered bin Laden before she herself is assassinated.
Yeah, but she made a mistake there. That Osama bin Laden was assassinated or whatever. It was actually another militant in Afghanistan, and she actually corrects herself. But you won't bring that up either. So she gets assassinated. Yeah, she does actually. She was targeted for assassination even years prior, and that came from people like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who actually has connections with the MI6 and intelligence services like the ISI. Basically, he's a creation of the ISI to help facilitate matters in Afghanistan regarding the Taliban. And he actually tried to threaten to fraction away, but the ISI basically said, you know, we can destroy you. Don't forget where you came from. And his group, the Hizb-e-Islami, which was the largest Afghan Mujahideen group during the Soviet war, received the most money from who? Well, the MI6, the CIA, the Israeli Mossad, the Saudi Macbeth, and other agencies that used front companies that funneled through the money, and the Saudi donors as well, millions of dollars came out that were sympathetic to these ghoulish Mujahideen leaders like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, Abdul Rasul Sayyaf, and Abu Haraj al-Rawati.
As she tries to run for the head of India, right? So you have the Pakistani angle, obviously funding these guys and involved in some kind of intelligence work, or why is he there meeting with all these officials as the war on terror is about to kick off? So you got Saudi Arabia, you got Pakistan. Now you have Israel, okay? And in, you know, Fabled Enemies especially, you talk about this ground level network that is throughout the United States pre 9/11, okay? And it's not just art students, but art students is a big part of that, right? You also had people who were in mall kiosks, for instance, and they were doing like the helicopter thing, but they had infiltrated all these different, you know, official and unofficial intelligence operations, right? If you go down the list of what Fox News exposed in January, it was all over the place. And then, of course, you have people being picked up prior to 9/11, the dancing Israelis, but then also the King Street incident that a lot of people don't talk about.
Yeah, by the way, that never happened. The audio is basically just combobulated. We don't know if the audio is even authentic. Not only that, there were reports that it was a panel truck with an explosive device. The person ran away from it. Nobody knows. By the way, there is an article. I will. What? I'll see if I can. I'll see if I can read it for you. I think I have it. So we'll read it together regarding this incident, which you basically are ignorant about as usual. So I'm going to look for King Street article. Okay. Yeah, this is it. So in the New York Times, I'm going to blow this up. And we are going to share screen. Here it is. 1 hour after the second tower trembled, unnerved pacifiers just south of Houston Street scattered as a police bomb squad towed away a large panel truck that had been abandoned on King Street, a street of row houses on the edge of Soho. After that, in first the hours and then the days ahead, every parked abandoned truck loomed as a potential bomb. So there you have it. The truck didn't explode. It was suspected to be a bomb truck It wasn't. It was actually a panel truck, and it belonged to a toy store, I think, at the time. So, there's that. So we can dispel that now.
They talk about the first van, but they have a van that exploded on King Street.
And I just showed you the article. That's not the case. I mean, really, he's irresponsible. That's all. I don't think he's an agent, or I don't think he's affiliated with any agencies, right? I think Jason Bermas is a young guy. He just basically got caught up in the allure of these fringe conspiracies, which are very alluring, and they can basically hook you. And he made a living off it because he has a Patreon account. He makes money. Made a film, which gave him importance and relevance in the truth movement at the time when it was huge. But basically, he disinformed millions of people because of it. So there's a price to be paid on your behalf and for what you have done, which is, in my eyes, irredeemable, what you've done.
And we put that in Fable.
Because you continue to misinform, and you won't ever correct yourself regarding crash scenes similar to Shanksville, which there are. You're just disingenuous. That's the worst I could say for you. I don't know you as a person. I bet you're a really cool guy. You watch MMA. So am I. I'm an MMA historian. I'm actually a collector of large, rare programs. Been doing so for the last 15 years. I love MMA. And I bet you would be a great person to hang out with. You have that type of personality. But in this instance, you are disingenuous regarding 9/11.
Enemies as well, which gives you the idea that these guys weren't just there to record the event, but were also part of the operations on the ground, in my opinion.
So I gotta,
again, remember let me reverse that for 10 seconds. Hear what he says.
Fabled enemies as well, which gives you the idea that these guys weren't just there to record the event, but were also part of the operations on the ground, in my opinion.
Your opinion. I don't care about your opinion. There's so many opinions. There's so many speculations. There's so much scenarios unfounded that are being believed by millions of people because you don't take care to say that what I'm saying next is speculation. Take it with a grain of salt. I do it as much as I can, and I try not to speculate at all. But there are times where I do, because there are some things I do opinionate on, which I try to be reasonable about. I don't believe in these ridiculous fringe theories, right? I try to share as much information to the public as possible in the hopes that in the future we'll have an educated 9/11 truth movement. And that's how you build a movement with educated people who know what they're talking about and can show information for which they provide, in which they relate to the public. Information that could be used in a court of law, because that's where I want to be. I want to be in court. Unfortunately, we have the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, which are led by notorious fringe conspiracists like Barbara Honegger and Jane Clark. And there's this new one, and Richard Gage now. Richard Gage is a no plane. He doesn't believe planes were hijacked. He's part of the Lawyers Committee. So they're going to fail, even if they somehow miraculously win in the Southern District of New York.
So I just got a question. I don't want the whole episode to take up 9/11 because just for people who are watching right now, like Jason and I have been talking for months. The 9/11 thing has just come up in like the last few weeks, become big with me. So I don't want it to all be, but I just have one question, which is about the hijackers. Like, what was the purpose of the hijackers? Because all the links that we see, like through the Israeli Mossad with Ziad Jarrah or with Al-Midar and Al-Hazmi through Saudi Arabia, if they weren't there to hijack planes, like what's the point? How do you have a Saudi link without them? How do you have an Israeli link without Ziad Jarrah? And especially with Ziad Jarrah, it's really interesting because the phone calls, they talk about 3 hijackers, all dark-skinned males, which Ziad Jarrah was not dark-skinned.
Reed nailed this interview, and I remember talking with DJ Danny on the side, and we were so impressed with Reed after this. It really changed my mind about it because I really, at the time, I didn't really know him, and when he interviewed me, and I basically came to his assistance regarding a 9/11 related topic on his Twitter profile. That's how I met him. And when he did this interview, I was floored. I said, wow, he really this is one of the best interviews he's ever done regarding 9/11. He's a libertarian. And for those who are not subscribed to him, I would subscribe to him. I am. He's really a solid guy. I've gotten to know him a little bit. I don't know too much about him. Like I don't know his personality and stuff like that. But he's a really nice guy, and he's not like an extremist of any sorts. He's a moderator. He's a great moderating channel. Like he'll have people on. He doesn't allow for any worldviews to interfere with the direction of the conversation. He lets the person talk, which is huge. There's so many videos I saw of him where he basically, I really enjoyed his demeanor, and really, I'm very fortunate to run into him. So
I don't personally believe he was on Flight 93. I think he was probably an Israeli mole. But what is the point of all these people who are being funded and all their connections if they're not hijacking planes and flying them into buildings? Why are they even there in the first
Well, I think
place?
they are hijacking planes and
Mhm.
and drilling that, right? Listen, I would assume the vast majority of those 19 probably were just kind of going along to get along. In other words, unknowing assets.
well, okay, that's not totally wrong. Okay, this is where I would say in response to that, Jason, is that they made video wills. I'm in possession of them. You can download them on archive.org, and they talk about doing martyrdom. Now, this is coming from the media, Al Qaeda media arm Al Sahab, right? They filmed these video wills regarding the muscle hijackers. Now, it is possible that a lot of these muscle hijackers would basically know very little. In fact, it is reported that through a number of articles, news articles, that they weren't told about the details of the operation until just a day or two prior. Now, they would be not in the know. All they needed to know was to hold back the people from getting into the cabin. That's all they needed to do. To kill somebody, maybe, show them, that's why they use box cutters. Why'd they use box cutters? Because a box cutter, you ever been cut with a box cutter? Do you know what would happen? Your skin separates and it becomes a huge cut. I have a scar on my thumb. Many years ago, I was a porter for Seatown, this fast food grocery store, where I was cutting a box, and I was just using the blade, and I cut the box and I spread through, and I cut a hole in my hand, and it opened up like a sieve, and it was huge, and blood was everywhere, and I cut it right down to the whites of my bones, and they used the box cutter because they saw that by using that you could cut somebody, and they see the cut across their throat, which would basically be enormous, and the blood would be pouring out. Nobody's going to interfere. No one's going to be, oh, shoot, I'm not getting, you'd be in a state of fear, paralysis. That's exactly why they use box cutters. According to Muhammad Atta, they use a box cutter because it symbolizes the cut of a lamb. And it would be easy because they were actually, when they were in Tora Bora, they were actually practicing slaughtering of lambs. And Marwan al-Shaheen, Ziad Jarrah, Hani Hanjour, Ramzi bin al-Shib. But bin al-Shib was supposed to be a pilot hijacker, but he couldn't get in the country. But yeah, that's what they were doing, a lot of these people. So that's why they use box cutters. And that, a lot of people say, oh, a box cutter ain't going to do nothing. Get cut with a box cutter. You'll change your mind real quick.
They actually
fast.
maybe believed in their
Whereas
jihad.
as opposed to getting stabbed by a knife, right? Where like a small knife, where it's not going to show the cut much. You get stabbed you get sliced with a box cutter, it is grotesque. I mean, truly grotesque. And then you have those people basically on the plane, hesitating to react,
etc. But a very select few knew exactly what they were doing, and they were running intelligence operations. You look at Atta, for instance, right? And you look at have you seen the Venice Flying Circus and Daniel Hopsticker's research with Rudy Deckers and the flight schools down there? I would definitely point people towards that because, Atta wasn't some kind of, Muslim purist. He was a coke dealer,
Well, no, there's no evidence he was a coke dealer. I mean, it's reported by his ex-girlfriend that he did drugs, which wouldn't surprise me because they were trying to, when they were at Tora Bora, it's alleged that they were to blend in with the Americans regarding their Western lifestyle. Now I'll submit to you that they were a version of two others, one inside the United States and one in Germany. In Germany, he was a religious fundamentalist. He didn't shy away from that. Whereas Ziad Jarrah played the part, I think, because he grew up in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. He grew up in a very secular household. He was actually friends with Jewish and Christians at elementary school, which is middle school for them. And basically, just happened when he moved to Germany to study at the University of Greifswald. He just happens to go to the most fundamentalist mosque in all of Germany, Al-Quds in Hamburg, out of nowhere. And he meets with very nefarious individuals, one of them being Marcel K., a nefarious individual who basically he never lost contact with. In fact, even when Ziad Jarrah was inside the United States, if there was a big problem, he would call Marcel K. Marcel K is actually an Arab fundamentalist who had connections with Hamas. And there's basically very little information regarding Marcel K. So go look that up. And that's where the real anomalies begin. Because if you look at the backgrounds of the people who these hijackers commiserated with, like Mohammed Haydar Zamar, Mahmoud Darkazali, guess what's right behind them? The CIA, right? The Israeli Mossad, right? But if there's no hijackers, there's no need to look into their affiliates and their counterparts, and you'll see the underpinnings of German intelligence, the BFB, the Israeli intelligence Mossad, the CIA, the NSA. You're not going to look at these things. And that's where the epic of all 9/11 is, right? Because if we want to go to the center, well, guess what? It's the NSA. The NSA bugged Osama bin Laden's satellite phone from 1992 to 1998. It was through that bug of that phone that they found the number to the Al-Qaeda communications hub in Yemen. And they bugged that phone from 1996 to 2001, 5 years prior to 9/11. What do you think they were talking about on satellite phone of bin Laden and that house in Yemen? What do you think? Now, imagine if they were talking about the planes operation. The NSA would have this information. And guess what? That's not speculation. According to former senior executive Thomas Drake, he basically said that the NSA had so much metadata, they could have stopped 9/11 outside of any other operation, just on the information they had, which is signals intelligence. They don't do human intelligence. You ever hear Jason Bermas talk about this? How about Barbara Honegger? How about anyone in the truth movement? Anyone. That's not a generalization. Anyone. They don't talk about it. You know why? Because if there's no hijackers, there's no reason to talk about the intelligence agencies who were involved with the monitoring of them. That's why, Jason, what you have done is basically so much damage, it can't be reversed.
Dating strippers, right? And there's even some talk that maybe.
And if they were talking about the operation on these phones, that means the NSA would know about it. And the NSA may not have shared that information with anybody else. Guess what? The CIA, they also had a bug inside the Yemen hub. So that means they would hear half of the phone calls. Let's just say the NSA had known about the operation and they told foreign intelligence to monitor these people, because how else could the Israeli Mossad or the Saudi GID know exactly who to follow? With the Saudi GID, it's basically Saudi officials like Omar al-Bayoumi, Osama Basnan, Fahad al-Dumeri, Saeed al-Jarrah, who basically were funding and helping who? Khalid al-Midar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, and Hani Hanjour out west. In the East Coast, it's the Hamburg cell. That's Mohammed Atta, Ziad Jarrah, Marwan al-Shia. Who was following them? Israeli moving front companies, Israeli art student ring, in Florida, in New Jersey, in New York. Who told them to follow these people? Why were they celebrating the attacks at the World Trade Center? It's a drone. They're celebrating the attacks of a drone in the World Trade Center? They're celebrating the attacks because it's successful. They hijacked the planes and they crashed them into their targets. They're clapping because now what comes after 9/11 is exactly what Israel wants. It's exactly what Saudi Arabia wants. It's exactly what the Bush White House wanted regarding foreign policy plans and outlines made years prior. There's your 9/11 anomaly. But you're not going to talk about it. You'll talk about no planes. You'll talk about, oh, there's no plane crashes similar to Shanksville, very few plane debris, or bandana, oh, the humanity. Space beams like Judy Wood, missiles being shot to the Pentagon. Guess what? All that is made to confuse and to disinform the general public, because God forbid if you investigated 9/11 properly and you find that there is a connection about about not sharing the information which was probably known to the intelligence agencies prior to 9/11. And there's your complicity. Is it so hard to believe that the Arabs made this plot and then the intelligence agencies got wind of the plot and they manipulated it?
Maybe he was doing that on Jack Abramoff's riverboat casinos as well. So I think at one level, you kind of have these assets that do the dirty work, the black ops of the CIA, right? And other intel networks. They are running drugs. They are the heads of actual terror networks. And I think that obviously hijackings took place that day. I really do believe that. As to whether or not those are the planes that actually go into the buildings, I don't think they are. I think that that's the cover to make sure that they get what's done. I think all.
Why? Okay. Again, I don't care what you believe. I don't care. Like, I want to know the information you have, which shows that the drones actually crashed into the World Trade Center, Pentagon, and Shanksville. Just show me the information. That's all I want. If you can't provide that information, why are you suggesting this as a statement of fact?
All those people are dead. You know, whether or not, for instance, you do listen to some of those audio inside those planes, right? We do have audio, we do have black box, we have some phone calls that do seem to be legitimate, that weren't cell phone calls, that were from air phones. And, you know, you have talks of the stabbings, right? You also have talks of what seems to be a gas and not being able to breathe inside.
No, mace, not gas. Whether they could have had another form of mace. What is that? I forgot the name of that one form of like noxious mace. It's heavier. I forgot the name of it, but that could have been used. Who knows?
You know, all these things do seem to be taking place. I think it's an overlap, right? Like, for instance, Able Danger is identifying and following these guys for some time, but yet they don't use any of the actionable intelligence to stop them.
Okay, that's not true. I've interviewed on my podcast Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer and Eric Kleinsmith from the Land Information Warfare's Activity Division, which was part of Able Danger. Okay, they said that they collected the information, which was through private and public source information that they found online. And they mapped out using Orion Scientific, which made a map of the information, the data that they collected from the Land Information Warfare's Activities Division. And they mapped out a huge network, bigger than what the FBI has ever conceived of, bigger than what anybody ever conceived of. When that happened, they collected, according to Eric Kleinsmith, was 3 terabytes of information. He was ordered to destroy that information from the lawyers at SOCOM, the Department of the Army, because they considered Mohammed Atta and Ziad Jarrah and Mohammed al-Sheikhi U.S. citizens. Even though they were foreign nationals, they were here on U.S. temp visas. However, even though he had to destroy that information, it came out later, as usual, through the House Intelligence Oversight Committee, I think, headed by the magic bullet theory guy, Congressman Arlen Specter, right? And basically, they asked this guy, William Dugan, who was a representative of the Department of Defense, who basically was asked by Arlen Specter, was Mohammed Atta considered a U.S. person? William Dugan basically says no. Now, if that's the case, that means that information that was collected by Able Danger shouldn't have been destroyed. But they had to destroy it. because anything after 30 days regarding the collection of American persons, if not used in a criminal case, has to be destroyed, can't be kept. Now they do it without even a warrant. The NSA does. But yeah, they couldn't act on it if they're ordered to destroy it.
It's the same thing with, how did Atta and the boys get to hijack what becomes Flight 11 when Flight 11 was just cased by Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Sahami, and the FBI knows about it? I mean, think about it.
No, I don't know where you got that from. Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Sahami never cased American Airlines 11. I don't know how I missed that. Wow. I can't believe I didn't bring this up before when you said it. I don't know, maybe I tuned out or something, but that's not true at all. They were given the assignment to be a part of American Airlines 77, and they were given the flight tickets.
That for a second, right? We're pre 9/11. A Hollywood actor, the pilot, and the stewardess all file reports. We know they got filed and nothing was done. We know that Waleed.
Why would there be anything done? If Muhammad Atta is seen months prior on a plane, what do you want to be done? Nothing is going on. He's just a regular Arab.
Al-Shehri, for instance, Reed, had the CIA called on him. Diane Albrighton thought the stuff that was going on next to her house was so shady, she called the Central Intelligence Agency, and nothing was done. I think assets.
I just got one question real quick.
Sure.
So do you think, because all these guys, they weren't great pilots, the whole idea was, the pilots are going to get them off the ground for us, and then we can just fly them into the targets.
Sure.
So did they just crash them somewhere, or was there a CIA pilot planted on the plane so they could land them and then kill all the
Or
passengers?
do you even need a person to do that with Global Hawk technology? Global Hawk technology was
Then if that's the case, why didn't Flight 93 crash into a target? If they're remotely controlled. Now, this is something I don't dismiss, right? That could have been very well happening. I said this before, early in the video, that in order to ensure that the crash into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, that they remotely guided the planes without the hijackers even knowledge, right? That could have very well happened, right? We don't have the cockpit voice recordings of 11 and 175 or 77. Okay, so we don't know what could have been said on the plane if they were trying to steer the plane to, say, maybe even an airport or something else, right? To that effect, we could hear them in the cockpit. But if they're yelling, if they're yelling in Arabic, I don't know what it is in Arabic. I'm not flying the plane. Well, the jig is up, right? Now we know there could be Boeing uninterruptible pilot system. But we don't know that for sure. Now, but you can't say that as a statement of fact.
around in the 90s and fitted in a lot of commercial aircrafts.
The technology existed for sure. But in 2006, Boeing actually bought the rights to it, 2006. And it's still not implemented in the planes yet because they fear malfunction in the air. That's what they fear. It's not trustworthy.
It's one of the things that's never really talked about. So you could remotely hijack a plane. In fact, it was put in there to stop hijackings from planes and discourage hijackers from doing so, because even if you did take manual control, it could be overridden. I think, again, I'll say it again. I think the evidence of the planes that hit the World Trade Centers, they look like drones to me.
I don't care what you think, right? That's, again, we should be only worried about knowledge, information, something you can hold in your hands, something you can act on. I don't care what you think. Who cares what you think? I think Godzilla ran into the World Trade Center. That's what did the damage. Is that any more irresponsible than what you're proposing? Of course, people say, oh, Godzilla wasn't seen. How do you know? He could have been invisible. He could have made those holes. Those planes could have been CGI holograms coming out of Godzilla's throat or his stomach. See what you could do with belief? You can do whatever you want. People do it all the time. But where's your evidence to suggest it? What information are you going on that the planes were hijacked and it's swapped in midair? That's a remarkable statement when you think about it. How could he possibly have information regarding that? Meanwhile, which would also show that there are hundreds, maybe even over 1,000 people involved with the cover-up, involving the public sector. You know, the people who would be not affiliated with the government. Imagine the enormous cover-up that would have to be involved, enormous amount of people that would have to be involved, and they all stood quiet to this point. How many people they would have to threaten or threaten to kill, threaten their livelihoods? You don't have any evidence to show for any of this. And yet, here you are proposing your speculations, which is the reason why the truth movement is destroyed, because they use speculation as a form of evidence.
You know, that flash, even in that first video, does not, you know, it looks reminiscent of that second flash. I know that's not popular. I know it's not something we even put in the second edition of Loose Change, etc. But I've seen it again and again and again. I think that apparatus is on the bottom. I think that's a gray plane.
Yeah, it's a great plane. United Airlines are gray. I showed the picture of this in the Hanukkah video. What a United Airlines plane looks like. It's a dark blue underbelly and dark gray on top. What's the big deal? That you think that it would be a pod underneath the dark blue underbelly of the United Airlines plane, which would shoot a missile inside the World Trade Center. What for? Wouldn't the plane filled with 33,000 pounds of fuel be enough? Why would they shoot? First of all, why would they need to shoot a missile into it? You ever ask yourself that question? Why would they need to do that when the plane itself is a missile?
I think that you had a multitude of things going on there. I think actual hijackings happened.
I think
again, the doomsday planes in there, who knows what kind of technology that is.
Doomsday plane? That's the continuity of government planes, the C-130. In terms of a national crisis, September 11th is considered a crisis, a national crisis. That plane goes up in the air, and that's the continuity of government. That's not a secret either. Go look it up.
E4B is a remote command center with the continuity of government on it. Exactly. Okay. And you're telling me there's nothing fishy when you have video of it at the scene of two of the crimes? The scene of two of the crimes.
Yeah, Shanksville, Pennsylvania. By the way, it was seen by a C-130 pilot, Stephen O'Brien, as well as other residents of the counties of Somerset County, Washington, D.C., because they're not far from each other. What's so mysterious about that? Considering the doomsday plane is basically an extension of the Department of State at the highest levels of government. Like I said, in terms of a national crisis. Where all this unfounded fear and speculation basically gives you the affordability to basically create whatever you want. And like I said, it's very alluring to anyone, just not to people who basically go by knowledge. People of knowledge don't care about belief. There's no validity.
It's at the Pentagon and it's at the World Trade Center. So again, without the proper investigative tools, right? Other than what we have open source via testimony, news, documentation, I can't subpoena somebody, right? Like I went on what was a Conspiracy Social Club. I ended up doing 2 episodes with Brian Callen and Sam Tripoli. And at the end of it, you know, Callen asked me, he goes, well, who do you think did it? And I go, I don't know exactly who did it. I don't have the power of subpoena. I can't investigate these people. I can't pull documents and then cross-examine and do all these things. I have to do that with the available evidence. But, you know, the available evidence to me is, you know, you have this Saudi, Pakistani, Israeli continuity government, aka shadow government operation here. I think that's the only way you make it happen. You need all those different tools. And obviously you need a complicit media, right?
And as well as disinformation, which you provided throughout this video and even in your film, Loose Change, right? Because you have alluded to many speculative ideas, which are basically demonstrably false, which I showed numerous times in this video. You can have the information like sprinkled truth along with lies. That's what Alex Jones does. That's how he hooks people. Oh, you see, he was right about this one thing, but then he talks about Sandy Hook or 9/11, and he's wrong. He's a salesman, and he has a huge, huge platform, which the intelligence agencies are very interested in. You know, he used to, years ago, he used to complain that he's being followed, that he's threatened to be killed. Listen, if he had even just a fraction of information that could threaten the establishment order, he would have been dead years ago. Oh, he's such a polarizing figure, it would be too obvious. Well, tell that to Gary Webb regarding his book, Dark Alliance, which talked about the crack cocaine trade of the LA nightlife and the CIA that imported the drugs. He was shot twice in the back of the head, and they confirmed that as suicide. The CIA doesn't make a habit of killing people unless they really have to. They could just destroy your reputation, which, you know, that's enough. That's why the NSA collects data. That's why the intelligence services are the most powerful entities on the face of the earth. There's no entity more powerful than, say, the NSA or the CIA. None. Not the banking industry, not the fossil fuel industry. The NSA has signal intelligence on every single person on the face of the earth. That's what 9/11 did for them. The NSA has a place called the Utah Data Center. In that place, which is in Platte Bluff, Utah, every single body's emails, text messages, and phone records are there. What you look through, what you searched on Google, DuckDuckGo. What is it there for? According to William Binney, it's there to hold, you know, certain people in a state of blackmail. That's what the Epstein investigation uncovered. That Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were agents of Israel, who basically had powerful leaders of state, world government leaders, basically come to these places where he would offer underage girls and they would have sex with them, and that they were being recorded doing so. And what were they doing that for? Blackmail. For who? For what? Well, that's the real question, right? So, I mean, you know, when you have the most powerful intelligence agencies on the face of the earth, like the CIA and the NSA and the DIA, basically working all in accordance with one another, and sure, there are some disagreements, they possess all the world's secrets. One of it being 9/11. And I'm not making anything up here. You know, like I said before, go listen to Thomas Drake, William Binney, Kirk J. Wiebe, all former NSA analysts. They all basically say Thomas Drake. Thomas Drake is probably the best whistleblower I've ever run across. According to Thomas Drake, like I said before in the video, the NSA alone had so much metadata, that means phone calls, that they listened to, that if shared with anybody else, they could have stopped 9/11, prevented 9/11 altogether, outside of any intelligence operation, outside the CIA, Israeli Mossad, Saudi jihad. That's how much data they had. But the truth movement won't talk about that.
And a complicit alliance in the United Nations, and that kind of goes along with all these different things. Sure, you have interests. I mean, you look at, for instance, the Saudi.
I know you don't really know my position, but I agree with you on a lot of the motives there. Like, I do not think that the terrorists hated us for our freedoms and just decided to hijack planes and fly them into targets, and that they had no help, and that it wasn't exploited. And you know, I think there's proof that Saudi Arabia definitely helped them, and then Pakistan and Israel also probably did too. So I'm not like this establishment shill who like hates anyone questioning anything.
No, I don't think you are. I mean, again, I just want to no, I don't think that's it at all. I don't think you can point to one group and say, you know, I know it all. And I know there are those people that
definitely don't claim that.
Yeah, well, exactly. But I see that a lot, or you have to take my position. Look, I've always been willing to say, hey, maybe I got this wrong.
No, you're not. In fact, you've been quite the opposite. We tried to contact you for a long time. And, you know, I don't know, I can't speak on DG thermal detonators behalf, but I can speak on my own. And I've nothing but cordial to you in the beginning. But ever since you called me a troll, yeah, I haven't been. And look, again, I will challenge you on 9/11, any aspect of 9/11 whatsoever. And I'm not somebody who claims to know it all either. In fact, all I do is try to provide the public a service of sharing factual information about 9/11, which you tend to disservice with your misinformation. But I know you're not going to debate me. I'm not alluring enough for you. I'm a small timer. And I'll basically only need 5 minutes to dispel anything you say about 9/11. Won't take long, especially if it's Shanksville, Pentagon. Won't take more than 5 minutes. Because you're wrong on just about everything you say regarding both of those incidents. It's not that you're wrong. You tend to use speculation as a form of, you more than anybody I've ever run into, speculate more about 9/11 than anything else. With Boland, it's much easier. I could show Boland wrong to be on multiple counts. Honegger, same thing. Rebecca Roth, even easier. You just tend to speculate. That's all you do. Wouldn't be good in a debate. Debate, you need evidence to show evidence for your claims.
Right. For instance, let's talk about the Pentagon for a second. You know, if you look at what we did in Loose Change Final Cut, we, again, went more towards the direction that nothing should have hit the Pentagon. And we went into heavily the Norman Mineta testimony, who was the transportation secretary. For those that don't know, he claimed on several occasions, including in front of the 9/11 Commission, that he was in the Presidential Emergency Operating Center with Dick Cheney prior to the Pentagon strike, right?
Right.
And he also made the claim that, you know, there was a young man in the room and he said the plane's
50 miles out, 50 miles out, 10 miles out.
Exactly. And, you know, I had always contended that it really looked like Dick Cheney was in there and that Norman Mineta had told the truth. Now, in 2016, so this is now 5 years ago, there were photographs released from inside the White House that I believe were from a Canon 16 millimeter. Again, if you believe what the government puts out. Now, I'm a Photoshop guy, right? And I know about metadata, and I looked at these things, and they looked very good, right? Very, very good. They looked very legitimate. The moral of this story is I went through a bunch of them, and there are a couple pictures of Scooter Libby and Cheney in his office, right? And you can see where the TV is on. And you got to zoom in, but you timestamp where's on that TV. And there's a possibility Mineta got it wrong. Maybe Cheney wasn't in the PEOC before the Pentagon strike. Maybe that is being truthful. You know, I can't tell you 100%.
He was actually, okay, I'll explain. When the World Trade Centers were hit, all the second plane hit, it was no longer a secret that this was a coordinated attack. Okay, and even Norman Mineta states this in interviews later, that the first incident is basically an incident. Second is an attack. Third is a program, right? Third hijacking, with third hijacking crashing into the program, right? So basically what happened was when the second plane hit the South Tower, there was a heightened state of emergency regarding emergency evictions of the White House, the Capitol, and the Pentagon. Now, the Pentagon was a heightened state of tension at that time because the Pentagon actually was a target for a plane attack even years prior. Now, there was an operation called Mascal, MASCAL, where they were coordinating in October of 2000, almost a year prior to the event, 9/11, where they were conducting exercises where a plane crashed into the Pentagon on top of the roof of the Pentagon, right? And they were talking about the emergency procedures and everybody that would be involved in the emergency apparatuses of the public and private sector, right? Who would be in charge in the chain of command, right? So that's what they were talking about. That's, you can Wikipedia that and read that at your leisure. When the second plane hit, Dick Cheney was actually dragged down to the PEOC Center, and that's where he was at to conduct the chain of command. And actually, when he was on the phone, he was trying to get on the phone with the President of the United States, George Bush, who basically at this time was on Air Force One. And now when the Pentagon was hit, Donald Rumsfeld was basically, he left the building. Now that chain of command is broken. So Cheney can't get really in touch with Bush. There's no shoot down order at that time after the plane hit the Pentagon. And not only that, nobody was informed about the first two planes. That wasn't the case with the Pentagon. The Pentagon plane was known to the FAA 30 minutes prior. However, there were no intercept jets because all these exercises were going on. However, there were some reserve jets at Andrews Air Force Base, and they were told to load up. However, they have to get authorization for this. And because there's no authorization for a shoot down order, because Cheney and Bush weren't talking at this time, and Rumsfeld is outside the Pentagon, the chain of command is broken. The vice president has no authority. Cheney, according, like I said before in the video, according to White House Chief of Staff Baker, he heard Cheney give the shoot down authority at 9:30 something a.m. Who the hell was he talking to? He doesn't have the authority to do a shoot down order. The president does. Secretary of Defense does. Guess what? They're not in there. The Bush is not at the PIOC, and Rumsfeld is not in the Pentagon. Why is he outside helping people? The nation is under attack. He should be, this is where Rumsfeld should be, in the Pentagon and the continuity of government. The continuity of government was broken when Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon. There's the freaking anomaly. Cheney was in charge of the government, which is basically a violation of his executive authority. The person coming in, sir, the plane is 50 miles out, is Naval Aide Thomas Douglas Cochran. That's who he is. The plane is 50 miles out. The plane is 40 miles out. There's no stand down order. It's a shoot down order. However, the planes weren't weaponized. So basically it was a stand down order as well. Because they didn't get the authorization for shoot down order. Why? Because Cheney didn't talk to Bush and he didn't talk to Rumsfeld. He gave the shoot down order. However, the chain of command is broken. And he committed a violation of his executive powers. Knowing full well, Cheney had to have known, maybe, this is speculation, that the planes that he's given a shoot down order to are weaponized. Because nobody at Andrews or at Cheyenne Mountain knows that Cheney talked to Bush. At that time, he didn't. There's no evidence to show that he did until 10:30. That's when he got the shoot down. By then, it was much too late. So both the shoot down and stand down order are right, but not to the extent that you're making it out to be. Cheney gave a shoot down order, but it wasn't authorized by the president. There was a stand down order regarding the planes because they're not getting the orders from the president. It's coming from Cheney, who's not part of the military chain of command. So NORAD basically is left in a state of paralysis. What do? Remember what I told you about knowledge and belief? Kevin Nespaney in that Vanity Fair article basically says that he didn't know what to do. Because they didn't hear from Bush. And Rumsfeld's outside the Pentagon.
But I can tell you that that made me question whether or not Monetta's testimony is real. And I'm willing to eat that. You know what I mean? I'm not here, to say I'm right all the time and then deny when I'm wrong. I want to know that I'm right? I want to look at the evidence and say, hey, this is evidence-based.
In order to know that you're right, you have to learn that you're wrong, right? You have to admit that you're wrong. But you're not willing to admit that. I'm going to end the video right here. That's the end anyway. but you're not willing to admit that you're wrong. That's your problem. It's either that's from your own ego, or that you're deliberately misinforming people, or that you basically don't want to admit you're wrong because of the fear of the ramifications of the backlash of your followers. One or the other. So I spent a lot on this video regarding it, but I wanted to make this video in response to Jason Bermas for a while regarding the Reed Coverdale show. And that's going to be it for today. Thanks for tuning in.